rounds for the first panel and 4-minute rounds for the others to ensure that we try to get everyone satisfied who wants to participate. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first and foremost, I want to sincerely thank the panel of military families who are here today to speak up and speak out for their families and for the families of all military personnel. I extend that thanks to a dozen more families that are here who are not here, but they've submitted written testimony that brings to life the painfully inadequate living conditions that some of our service members and families are enduring as we speak. I also want to thank the panels of housing companies and DoD witnesses for agreeing to appear today. We have a real problem here. Everyone needs to acknowledge that reality, and everyone here needs to work constructively and quickly to ensure our military families have the housing they deserve in the minds of the American people. The committee has received scores of heartbreaking testimonials with equally disturbing photos of rampant mold, poor water quality, contamination with lead-based paint, carbon monoxide, radon, faulty construction, infestation of kitchens and other living areas. The impact of these conditions leaves residents fearful for their families' health and well-being. Equally alarming is a recent survey from the Military Family Advisory Network, which found that more than half, 55.5% of families, had a negative or very negative experience with privatized military housing across 35 different companies. I think it is fair to say that generally, military housing has improved upon where it was in the 1990s when this program began. However, here we are 20 years later. There is a clear disconnect between what has been promised by the companies as permitted by the DoD and the reality of what has been provided to military families. I understand several families have traveled here today at their own expense, and as a result, would all the military families, the audience, please stand up so we can recognize you and thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. A service member's commitment extends beyond the missions they complete. They dedicate their entire family's lives to serving this country, serving this nation. This committee is similarly obligated to ensure it meets the needs of service members and their families once they return home. It is our commitment today that this hearing will be the first step towards doing just that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you.
Hear from the chairs and the ranking members of the Personnel Readiness Subcommittees. We'll start with Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. By the way, I noticed y'all were talking when he said 3-minute rounds, and what he meant by that is multiply the number of Q&A by the number of members up here. We'll each have 3 minutes to ask you questions. Doesn't seem like a lot of time, but you need to understand that these committee hearings are kind of like the tip of the iceberg. This is where you get information to the members. I'm from North Carolina. I have a vested interest in making sure that we get this right. But the real work happens after the hearing when the staff and members get together. And what I'm interested in, I'm going to be brief so that we can get to your testimony, is just back to what Senator Reid said. When we did this in the mid-90s, it was because the department was doing a very poor job. Then we tended to improve. But now we seem to have backslid. So as we go through your own personal testimonies, and I've spent a fair amount of time this week, and I've seen the pictures that have come to me in different forms, I'll be asking other members of the panel, how did we get here? How did we not have the governance in place to identify this? How did we not have a safety valve for the military families to actually solve a problem? And I'll leave it with this. There's a variety of reasons why we should all be concerned with this. Some of it is just at the human level. You see the pictures of children with respiratory problems. You see mushrooms growing out of upstairs bathrooms, all of these kinds of things. But think about it also as something that affects readiness, because if you got a man or woman deployed and all of a sudden they're calling home and they've got the spouse at home talking about these problems and worried about the health and well-being of their children, they're not as ready, they're not as focused, and not as capable as we want them to be to protect their lives and the lives of their colleagues. So I look forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe and Senator Reid, for calling this very important hearing as quickly as possible so that we can start to address these issues and find solutions for our service members and their families. This hearing will rightly begin with the testimony from military families. We will hear the stories of toxic mold, lead paint, pest infestation, and other health risks present in their homes. We will hear how these terrible conditions are harming the health of our military families, and we will hear about the long-term consequences they're actually having on their children. We will also hear about contractors and their military partners completely failing our military families and not responding to the crisis in an adequate or timely way. It's yet another example of corporate profits coming before the health of our military families. The committee has received dozens of testimonies from families beyond what we will hear today on our first panel. The nonprofit Military Family Advisory Network has compiled the stories of many of these families and concluded that, quote, the concerns of families are ignored and families are expected to tolerate these conditions. This is completely unacceptable. In most cases, it's not just a single exposure to mold spores or lead-based paint that causes health issues or birth defects, but rather the sustained exposure over many weeks and months. There should have been a prompt and professional response to the initial call for help. We should have been able to avoid this situation. For example, the committee received testimony from a family in Oklahoma with 5 children that not only suffered long-term health problems because of black mold, but put themselves in tens of thousands of dollars of personal debt trying to remediate their situation. Yet the company apparently tried to hide the problems from the family. A family in Texas called their management company when they found mold following the mother's hospitalization. The company sent an unqualified technician who failed to diagnose the problem. The company refused to send an expert to test for mold. When the family paid out of pocket for their own inspection, which confirmed the presence of mold at dangerous levels, the company denied the request for reimbursement. That family continues to experience health issues today. When a family in my home state of New York noticed the uninhabited house connected to theirs flooding from a water leak, their management company shut off the water and told them not to worry. When their walls started to buckle from water damage, the company told them, quote, the house was settling. When bubbles formed on their ceilings, they were told it was just humidity. In order to move from the residence, the management company required a letter from a doctor attesting to the family's health issues. Adding insult to injury, the company ultimately denied their claim for all the personal items and furniture that had to be destroyed due to mold. When a family from New Orleans detected mold in their house after experiencing health issues, the management company did not believe them and did not test or remediate. When the pregnant mother's OBGYN requested mold testing and duct cleaning after becoming concerned that the mother could lose her child, the management company scheduled the work and then canceled it. They said they were not responsible for resident health. The family paid for their own test, which revealed 6 types of mold in the house. That family and that baby continue to experience health issues today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing today. I want to make sure that as we listen to the families and recognize their service and courage, that we have our other witnesses, the DOD witnesses, the contractors who are intently taking notes and thinking about how they will fix this problem. As I've dug into this issue, I'm hopeful that we can all agree, everybody here, all the senators, all the witnesses, on 3 things. We should have the best possible housing for our military and families. Period. There's a lot of talk about the 1% in America. Well, guess what? We're looking at a lot of the 1% in America. It's the less than 1% that actually raise their right hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and die for this country and their families. And they should have the best housing. Period. That's not even, shouldn't be in dispute. Second, we need to fix the lack of accountability and oversight that has come from this, whether it's a DOD or a chain of command or contractors. What to me is so appalling as I've dug through a lot of these issues is how people, families, military families, weren't being listened to, either within the chain of command, the Department of Defense, or the contractors. We have to understand why and fix it. And finally, we need to fix the program for today and for the future. There are things in this hearing that I think are going to likely shock many Americans, that we're going to hear about military families who are living with things like black mold and rodent infestations and raw sewage. We need to look at this program, not scrap this program. There are a lot of good homes, including in my state, in Alaska, that provide quality and affordable housing for our service members, but something has gone terribly wrong with the system and how to fix it. So I think if we can agree on these three things, Mr. Chairman, it'll be an important start. I do want to thank the service members and their families. It takes a lot of courage for you to be here, those who have traveled to be here, and we are looking forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses who will appear and everybody who's with us today. I am proud to be on this committee. I'm proud to represent a state that has such a proud military history and has so many current active, Guard, Reserve, DOD civilian, military families, military contractors. I'm proud to have a child in the United States Marine Corps. I am not proud to be here today. This is the kind of hearing we should never have to have. One of the occupational hazards of being in the line of work that many of us are in is it gets harder and harder to shock me. We all see a lot of stuff, and our standards of what will shock or outrageous kind of change over time. This is shocking. I look forward to the questions, but I just want to offer two sets of thanks to people who aren't going to be at the witness table today. First, to the Military Family Advisory Network for doing this survey. Everyone in this room should read the survey. You should read the summary of what has happened, but you should especially read the narratives of the families and the photos that they submit that are at the end of the survey. It is very, very important work that you've done, and you've been very, very helpful in encouraging action by the committee. Second, I want to thank Reuters. This first came to our attention in our office by Reuters reports. There's a school of thought sadly expressed from people even in high offices these days that the press is the enemy of the people. The press does what they need to do in this country. We put it in the First Amendment for a reason, and the reason that freedom of press is in the First Amendment is because of hearings like this one. It has been accelerated and brought to more attention more quickly than it would have because of the diligent efforts of journalists to interact with families and tell their stories. And I want to thank the press for doing a good job on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. What we're going to do now is hear from the three young ladies who are representing many, many families. And we're going to ask you to try to keep your opening comments down to 5 minutes. However, your entire statement that you have submitted will be made part of the record. Then we'll ensue with our questions from the panel here. So we'll start with you, Ms. Cornwell. You are recognized.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to participate in today's hearing. I am Crystal Cornwall, the proud spouse of a Marine of 11 years, a passionate military family advocate, and founder of the nonprofit Safe Military Housing Initiative. I'm currently a finance professional, a former police officer, and have a bachelor's in public administration and am working towards a master's degree. In many ways, I am like every other military spouse. We are at our 4th duty station and are anticipating a GEO batch tour in the fall. For the next 3 years, my husband will serve away from our family. Our 3 children have only known their father preparing for or deploying to war, a war that has endured 18 long years. I am here today on behalf of military families of every branch and rank. We ask that you act on our testimony and ensure military families receive safe, habitable, and functional housing, and a better, more accountable way to resolve problems that arise. I first became aware of the crisis-level military housing issues at Keesler Air Force Base, where termites fell out of light fixtures into our beds. Later at Camp Pendleton, we lived with pervasive mold issues and unjustifiable move-out charges. At Keesler, the housing office staff told me, termites in your home are to be expected because of the region. At Camp Pendleton, we were inexplicably charged almost $700 for carpet replacement. The housing rep used a black light and moisture stick to find stains unseen by the naked eye. When I disputed the validity of these charges, I found no path to resolution with the housing company, Camp Pendleton, or my husband's former command. In the end, various agencies and local attorneys advised us that military families living on the bases are essentially powerless in these disputes. During my 2 years of research and advocacy, I received hundreds of reports from military families of mold growth, rodent and pest infestations, moisture intrusion, lead and asbestos exposures, radon concerns, base contamination, and cancer clusters in their housing. All of this was too often compounded by defensive, sometimes abusive housing staff. With other military families, I have witnessed the peeling paint inside and outside of the homes at Fort Belvoir. I have felt the helplessness of a fellow Marine Corps spouse as she held her new baby and sobbed while we stood under a collapsing, moldy ceiling in her home at Camp Lejeune. I listened in horror as families at Camp Pendleton told of mice eating through pacifiers in their babies' cribs and electrical outlets catching fire due to wiring issues. I've crawled into an attic at Keesler Air Force Base and measured the moisture intrusion from a roof leak. And I have been to the town halls where families were dismissed, and they also feared retaliation for reporting their concerns. Today, you will hear from the corporate housing company executives testifying that they were unaware of these problems and that their own surveys show they are fulfilling the terms of their government contracts. They, and some of those in command, will also say military families are not reporting housing issues through official channels. That's just not accurate in my experience and in those of other military families. In fact, that's what military families do. We follow the rules. Until recent media reports in today's hearing, our efforts to fight for safe housing were too often met with intimidation, personal attacks, and strategic attempts to discredit us and silence our voices. We are appalled by this response. But looking ahead, we offer 3 recommendations to address the military housing crisis. Amend or cancel the 50-year privatized contracts to allow for competition, proper oversight, and accountability. Provide a clear and accessible path to administrative or legal recourse when necessary. As with civilian counterparts, military families should be able to withhold their basic housing allowances until their homes are safe and habitable. Military families understand that quality housing does not mean entitlement to elegant mansions. We simply ask for homes free of mold, pest, lead, and other hazards. We expect homes free from the stressors of deployments, workups, training, and the day-to-day military service. As parents, we want safe places for our children to sleep at night. Thank you for your time today and commitment to resolving military housing crisis. We look forward to working with you to create solutions. As military families, we do our part. We ask that those who are paid to support us do theirs.
Well, thank you very much for the excellent statement, Ms. Cornwall.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Warner.
My name is Jana Warner. I'm an Army spouse of 9 years, and we are currently stationed at Fort Meade in Maryland. My husband is a Sergeant First Class, and we have 2 children. We are enrolled in the Department of Defense's Exceptional Family Member Program, which means that the department helps us with adaptive housing, proper medical care, and educational needs for our daughter, who has a rare genetic condition that causes both physical and educational issues. While it's not a perfect system, we are extremely grateful for the EFM program, as it allows my spouse to train and deploy without worrying about our safety and welfare at home. 5 months before we moved to Fort Meade, we contacted the Corvius housing staff to select a home. Due to our daughter's medical condition, we needed and requested a single-story home without stairs. We verbally made the housing staff aware over the phone that our daughter has knee problems associated with her medical condition. Corvius assured us that since we were placed on the wait list 5 months prior to our report date, that they would have plenty of time to accommodate our request. After selecting from the choices that were provided by the housing staff, Corvius committed to providing us the single-story home that we selected. We packed for our move, had our household goods delivery set up, confident that the house we selected would accommodate us and our special needs and be ready upon our arrival. 5 days before our move from Fort Gordon, 600 miles away, we received a phone call from Corvius that the home we had secured with the lease was no longer available. The explanation that we were given from Corvius was that the current family in the home was no longer moving out, and now we only had one option to choose for housing. It was the height of moving season, known as PCS. With no time left, we decided to take the only house that Corvius offered that would be available upon arrival. We accepted a multi-story townhome on the base rather than risk not having any home at all. This meant that when our daughter dislocated her knee or when she required surgery on her knee again, she has to go up and down the stairs to get to her room. Before we moved into housing, we were quoted a fixed-rate rent for the house. Upon arrival, we were given a slightly higher rate, but we did feel powerless in arguing the difference in rent prices. A few months later, Corvius claimed that they had miscalculated their own move-in costs and were demanding that we pay them an additional $14, even though this was their own mistake. In January, when the housing allowance pay was adjusted, Corvius also took it upon themselves to disregard our fixed market rate lease and increased our pay deduction by $177 without our consent or informing us. Once we provided them proof of our market rate addendum, which was attached to our lease, we were given the burden of proof. Shortly after correcting the housing allotment, Corvius staff informed us that they will increase our rent again in July, despite their initial promise to continue to renew our lease at a market rate. Shortly after moving in, we began to notice issues with our home. The linoleum floor around our first-level toilet started to get large black matter visible underneath, and it continued to grow. After our first work order, Corvius did not send any workers or inspectors, so we submitted a second work order. Housing finally came to our home after an unexplained 2-week delay. They took out our toilet and placed it in our laundry room, and it sat there for 2 days. They also pulled up the bathroom floor and exposed the house to extensive black mold for the next 2 days. Maintenance did not properly clean the concrete below and place new linoleum over the mold-covered concrete. The contractors Corvius sent to our home to repair the bathroom even stated that the work that they had completed was a Band-Aid. Shortly after the first floor bathroom issue was addressed, we began noticing issues with our second floor bathroom. Mold was growing out of the wall of our shower. When Corvius Maintenance came to address our work order for this, they told us, and this is a direct quote, "Let the mold just fall out. If we seal the area, the moisture will just be trapped inside." Meanwhile, the area that we can see behind the shower wall is black and actively growing mold because it continues to get wet. We also requested an air quality check from housing due to our daughter's frequent nosebleeds and the bathroom mold issues that we have encountered. Corvius, however, has not committed to checking our air quality, and it has been more than 2 weeks since we have heard from the housing office. Meanwhile, we still live in these conditions. Our story is not unique, nor is it the worst. Almost 17,000 military families responded to a survey by the Military Family Advisory Network with testimonials of unhealthy living conditions and privatized housing on military bases, and many more were given to other military family nonprofits. Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to testify and for addressing the serious issues of the health, safety, and welfare of our military families.
Thank you, Ms. Winter. Mr. Driver.
My name is Jana Driver, and my husband is currently active duty Air Force stationed at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. We lived on base in privatized housing managed by Balfour Beatty. We had numerous ongoing issues in our home, including maintenance issues that were neglected over the less than 2 years we lived there, which ultimately resulted in making my family very sick. Our housing company has known about these issues for years and are taking advantage of young military families who are not educated on how to properly treat mold and the health effects it causes. They are covering up, painting over mold, threatening military members with their command, using scare tactics and intimidation, lying to us, and making the problems worse. And now it is out of control. They have been banking on the fact that we would likely PCS to another base before what they covered up would reappear. On the surface, these homes appear to be flawless, but inside the walls tell a different story. On August 19, 2018, after lengthy and constant illnesses, my husband and I began to discover the real cause of all of our symptoms. I spent the weekend deep cleaning because we had all been so sick for so long. The utility room in our house was also my children's playroom where they played daily. In the utility room, I moved their small card table that was leaning up against the wall. The wall was solid black. I never thought mold. I thought it was residue from the padded side of their table. I wiped it off and continued cleaning. The symptoms we had included constant sore throats, nosebleeds, brain fog, blurred vision, numbness, fatigue, debilitating headaches. Even the 4-year-olds complained daily of these headaches along with dizziness. Knowing headaches are not normal for a child of that age, I was concerned they may have cancer. One of my twins suffered numerous times from respiratory distress that required emergency room visits. On Monday, August the 20th, we called maintenance to repair a leak in the utility room. This was the 9th leak we had had in less than a year and a half. Maintenance came, cut a large hole in the sheetrock, and repaired the leak. Upon completion, he asked if we wanted the hole repaired or if we were okay to leave this large hole in our wall. There were numerous large discolored spots on the same wall. We asked if those were from that same leak. He said no. He then told us he wanted to go out and look at our mechanical room, which is directly behind this utility room. This is a locked room attached to our homes that house hot water heaters and our HVACs. We are not allowed access to these rooms by housing. I told my husband to follow him. He walked up behind him and overheard a frantic phone conversation between he and the housing office about how our mechanical room needed to be repaired immediately. When he noticed my husband standing behind him, he frantically began saying, "You cannot be in here. I'm not allowed to let you see in this room." My husband said, "We pay for this house. I'm coming in." Upon entering, he saw black mold covering the walls, floor to ceiling. He immediately called housing maintenance. The housing office told him they had known about the mold since March and had been treating it by scrubbing it with bleach and water. When he asked why we were not notified, she stated she assumed the technicians had already told us. We have verified with numerous experts that this process is only acceptable when the area of focus is very small, and never use bleach on a porous surface. Doing this only feeds the mold, causing it to grow faster, spread, and multiply. We have shared this information with the housing company numerous times. To this day, they continue to use this process. The next morning, my husband and his command met with our military housing liaison and our local housing community manager at our home. We were told by this manager that they had actually been documenting the mold since February, not March, and had she known how bad the room was, we would not have been allowed to continue living there. We told her we wanted mold testing done by a company of our choosing before any remediation began. That was refused. 1 week later, this manager no longer worked for that company. Balfour Beatty then moved our family into a Patriot home. These are homes used to temporarily house families while work is being done to their own homes. We were told it had no mold, that it was clean and safe. The first day we were there, we found mold. The home was filthy, dirt on the floors, stains on the couch and carpets, bugs in the drawer in the kitchen. There were leaks in the Patriot home, water pouring into a light fixture in the ceiling from an upstairs bathroom. We called housing. They came and cut a 2-by-2-inch square in the ceiling and left it, causing water then to pour into the floor of the utility room instead of into the light fixture. We began to feel worse in this home and requested to be moved to a hotel. Initially, housing would only commit to one night at a time, leaving us each night to wonder where we would go the next day and the next night after that with 5 children. We had to borrow a credit card from my parents so that we at least had the security of a roof over our heads for more than one night at a time. Eventually, the company agreed to go back and pay for those, and finally, upon hiring an attorney, we were extended in the hotel for over 2 months. All total, we were out of our home for approximately 3 months with 5 small children, spending approximately 80 days in a hotel, which cost $17,000. We had to hire our own mold company to come test the mold at our home. The test results showed all 5 of the toxic molds present inside our home. We believe the mold was contained to our utility room and maintenance closet initially. Air samples of our living room were clean. We had to pay out of pocket to see a doctor in Midwest City who specializes in toxic mold exposure. We have tested positive for the presence of mycotoxins in our bodies. Housing subcontracted a company to remediate the mold. We know for a fact that the remediation was done improperly. Vents were not covered, and contaminated items that were in the utility room were put inside my garage as well as my kitchen.
Ms.
and living
Driver,
room.
try to bring your comments to a close, if you would.
We will likely suffer from the effects of this for the rest of our lives, physically, financially, emotionally, and mentally. My family has gone from $0 to $40,000 debt in a 3-month period. I suffer daily from chronic breathing issues and blurred vision due to the mold in my brain. We take an enormous amount of binders and prescriptions daily with no end in sight. It didn't have to be this way. Our military families do not deserve this after all the sacrifices they make. It is criminal. It is unbelievable the extent of this cover-up. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Driver, and for the benefit of my fellow senators, she has put together some pictures to fortify her statement, one of her 4-year-old twin daughter. Before we start our 3-minute rounds, the committee's received dozens of testimonies from families as well as statements for the record from a number of military family organizations, and I move that these be submitted into the public record and that the records stay open for 48 hours for any other families who wish to submit a statement, and without objection, that's so ordered. Nothing is more important than taking care of our families so that Americans who volunteer to fight on behalf of us know that the ones that they love are cared for. That's very basic. Ms. Driver, do you believe that you have an advocate fighting for safe housing for our military families?
I know of our military housing liaison has fought tirelessly to help families at Tinker. Mm-hmm. But that's about as far as it goes.
Yes, and I'd say this to all of the military families that are represented here. Do you believe the military families' experiences in the base housing will impact their decision to remain in the service, each one of you? Yeah. See, that's one of the problems we're having right now. We are trying to rebuild a force that needs to be rebuilt for all of our safeties. This does have a negative effect on that. I'm fearful. Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And ladies, thank you for a very compelling testimony and being here today. Just very quickly, starting with Mrs. Cornwell, what's the one immediate change you'd like to see? Something on the order of giving the housing facilitator more power, or something that we can do, or the military, actually, Department of Defense, can do right away?
Thank you for your question, sir. One of the things that I think is important to do right away is give the military families an ability to stop their BAH until the problems are fixed. That might mean putting their BAH in escrow and or giving the government housing offices a little bit more power to address those issues and being able to look at the PPV and say, you will do this, or X, Y, and Z is going to happen.
Very good. Ms. Warner. Yeah.
There's more to do than what I have time to say, but I will echo what she says is they need to withhold the BAH payments to housing. Clearly, the money that they are receiving is not going to provide us with stellar housing and the conditions that we deserve, and all they're doing is profiting off of families moving in and out constantly, and I feel like if their payments are withheld, then maybe it will entice them to do more to protect our families and keep us safe.
Thank you. Ms. Driver, please, your comments.
I believe this has been going on, and that people have been aware of these problems for a very long time. And I believe as well that money they should not be being funded their management fees if they are not in compliance.
Thank you all. Again, thank you, ladies, for your very compelling testimony.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Driver, you were talking about having a housing advocate for you that's working but not getting a result. Let me just say for the benefit of anybody in this room and anybody watching it, that every single member on this committee is behind you, and every single one of us love doing casework. And so you can, as we're trying to solve this problem, as you know of families that are going through what you're going through right now, find out who your local elected, who your senator is. And if you're at Fort Bragg or Camp Lejeune or Cherry Point or New River, you call my office and I'll guarantee you we'll help your housing liaison and we'll at least deal with that while we're trying to solve the systemic problem. I'm not going to ask you all a lot of questions because I have a lot of testimony and I've got a whole lot of questions for the next two panels. Thank you all for being here, but please communicate through your organizations and others. We do casework. We will help you. Just let us know you need the help. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Gillibrand.
Based on your experience with the privatized housing program, are you more or less likely to recommend military service to a friend or relative and their family?
Based on what I've gone through as a military spouse, I've become very disenfranchised by what has happened in my research over the last 2 years. I wouldn't recommend my own children to join the service, and my husband's been a Marine for almost 12 years.
Jana?
I would not recommend it after everything that we have been through, especially health-wise. And when our accommodations were not met for our EFMP child, I think that pretty much solidified the decision that we will never live in base housing again and we will never recommend it to anyone ever again. And I think it would be difficult to recommend joining the service to anyone if they wanted to live in base housing.
I agree. I would never recommend anyone to live in base housing. I enjoyed my time living on base until I discovered that our home was making us very sick. The amenities of living on base are are wonderful, but the homes are definitely making people sick.
What was your experience in trying to raise this with the chain of command? Do you believe that they responded appropriately? Do you believe they have enough authority to intervene on your behalf to hold the contractors accountable? And are you aware of any actions that the military or the Department of Defense took to hold the companies financially accountable when these problems were exposed?
Thank you for your question. In my personal experience going through the chain of command, we had no help, even though I had volunteered over 1,300 hours with that chain of command. Further, my family readiness officer had actually been retaliated against for standing up for our family against Lincoln Military Housing.
We didn't have the opportunity to reach out to my husband's chain of command because everything just happened so quickly. And we didn't, honestly, we did not know that it was an option. We thought that maybe since it was a private company that maybe the military's hands were tied and the chain of command would not be able to be as effective as our own voices. So we just dealt with it on our own.
My husband's command, his direct command was very helpful to us, provided things we weren't able to afford after this happened to us. But that's about as high up as it went. We did not get help from the base commander. It seemed like lip service. We received letters, and we had a town hall meeting that he was actively a part of, and I've put links to that town hall in my binder. I hope you would have a chance to look at that. And the military housing liaison that we have at Tinker is exceptional, in my opinion. That's not the case at most bases. They do not have help from their military housing liaisons there. I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank again the witnesses for having the courage to testify and for your service to our country. Whether you're serving in the military or not, you're serving, right? Because your family is, so you are. I'm a colonel in the Marines. I have 3 daughters. I've told my girls that, and my wife, they all serve their country, right? You're all serving our country, so thank you. I want to, first I want to reiterate Senator Tillis's point. I think that's really important. These are the kind of things that you can come to your senator or congressman about, and we will get involved, and we will ask questions. So continue to pass the word on that, whether it's in Alaska, for me, or North Carolina or Oklahoma. But I want to unpack a little bit more of this chain of command issue that Senator Gillibrand had just asked about. In terms of the details, so for example, Ms. Cornwall, you said they weren't helpful, were they just saying, hey, suck it up, you're a Marine, get over it, or were they maybe trying to, and then there's a disconnect between kind of what the military chain of command can do and then over to the housing authority or the private company? I mean, what was the experience really for all of you? Some said you had a better experience with the chain of command, but to me, this is a huge issue. And can you give me a little more detail on your experience?
Yes, sir. The issue with the chain of command with the Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton was, I think they just simply took the word of the PPV over their family. And then when we had a family readiness officer step in and advocate on our behalf, we had already left the unit as it was. He still took the time to advocate on our behalf. And even he was retaliated against by the base command and had no support from the colonel at our MU. Unfortunately, he has actually left the family readiness program because of this issue.
Let me ask, Ms. Stryer, you had mentioned something that to me was very disturbing if it's true and systematic, and I have no reason to doubt that it is true because you stated it. But did you or did others see examples of, you mentioned, hey, young military families, you got a young guy, young spouse coming in, he's a Lance Corporal or a PFC, or you think they were taking advantage of young military families because they're young and inexperienced and maybe don't want to question authority?
Absolutely, 100%. I believe that's what's happening. My neighbors, who we share a wall with, were moved into a home that we visually saw. They were pressure washing mold off of the wall in their house before they moved in. This young family moved in. They just got married, first home they've ever lived in. They don't know the toxic effects of this type of mold. We're not talking about just a little bathroom mold in your shower. We're talking mold growing through the walls. And I just think young people are not aware of how toxic it is and the health effects that come from it.
Thank you. Thank you again for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that, I think that certainly merits follow-up questions for our next panel. If that's happening, that's outrageous. Outrageous.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the course of our history, it's been sad that often military members and their families have kind of been viewed as profit centers to soak. President Truman came to attention first as a senator when the Curtiss Aeronautical Company got caught sending defective engines into theater war during World War II, and it was an unholy alliance between people at the plant and military officials, exposing people's lives to make money. We've had payday lenders and other kinds of aggressive and predatory lenders kind of cluster around military members and their families. We've had low-quality, for-profit educational institutions view GI Bill benefits as a place where they can go to try to make a lot of money without offering a quality product. And I think one of the things that we're going to try to do in this work and in the NDA is to make sure that this is not what's happening here, that the quest for a profit is not blinding people to the reality of the service that you provide. Ms. Cornwall, I want to dig into this retaliation incident, because if you've got a problem, to me, the most shocking part of the survey that Military Families Advisory Network did is actually not the physical conditions, it's the way you get a runaround when you try to get help. So you've got a housing liaison officer. In the Marines, you have a family readiness advocate. You have a chain of command through your spouse's unit. You have the private housing provider. There should be multiple places where you can go to help. But as I read the stories, it sounds like there's a lot of finger pointing. We can't do it, it's somebody else's. But I'm particularly interested in this retaliation incident, because since I'm a little bit familiar with the Marine program, I have these family readiness specialists. So what did your family readiness specialist do, and describe the retaliation?
Upon leaving the unit, I let him know that this was happening to us, and I was concerned about what was happening to other military families within the unit. Again, I volunteered very heavily there, so we had a very good relationship. essentially, I went to him, told him what happened. He knew that there was another spouse on the general officer side of the house who was also investigating issues in that housing area, including mold. So he put me in touch with her, and then her and I kind of teamed up to sort of address it on a whole scale on Camp Pendleton. When the base command found out about that, and the base command, like the base general officer, when he found out about that, the family readiness officer was told to stand down, that we had left the unit, that there was nothing else that they could do. The Mhpi command...
But why would the base command be more loyal to the housing provider than to you?
Well, that's a really great question. We haven't been able to figure that out. I believe that the marriage between the PPVs and the base commands is the biggest detrimental part to this issue. For example, the government housing offices are inside the PPV. Like for Lincoln Military Housing, our government housing office is inside that building. There is a marriage there, and there's a certain loyalty there that supersedes a loyalty to military families.
My timing is up, but
I'm sorry.
Thank you for that answer.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ernst.
Oh, thank you. I'm just sitting down in the hot seat, but I want to thank all of the families for being here today. I'm a former military spouse as well, having lived on Fort Benning and Eglin Air Force Base and Fort Jackson. So I can commiserate with some of the instances, but certainly not all of the things that you and your families have had to endure. So thank you very much for being here and for shedding light on something that so many families have had to suffer through. So thank you very much. Again, I'm really sorry about all of the issues that you've experienced in military housing. We know that you deserve and have earned much, much better than what you have received. Based on your personal experience, can you discuss some of the challenges, like with getting the termite and mold issues fixed, what steps you've taken? I know you've probably answered some of those already, but if you would, just go ahead and please express those again, and then where you think we need to be going in the future. What would be your perfect solution to making sure that our military families have safe housing that is conducive of raising healthy families and kids that are able to learn and grow? What is your perfect environment?
Well, to answer your first question, I think that, okay, so there's a marriage between the PPVs that is hard to get past and the military. In my personal experience, I went to, like, Philip Rizzo, who's the VP of Operations nationally for Lincoln Military Housing. We had many conversations. Each one of those conversations was met with a very dismissive tone. We would go to him and tell him about these families on Camp Pendleton. He would dismiss it and blame the families. I sent a package to the Secretary of Defense Mattis when he was there, and their office had to send it down to Robert McMahon. And they told me they had to stay in their lane. Mm-hmm. They have one lane. That's military readiness.
Right. Thank you. Any other thoughts, ladies? What would your perfect environment be? What is the solution?
One problem I see is that they've been allowed 50-year contracts. I don't know any contract that you could make with somebody for that long of a period of time. And I believe they've been given chance after chance after chance, and they've known about these issues. So I struggle to understand why they're allowed to be able to hold on to these contracts.
Exceptional point. And Jana, do you have any other thoughts?
I feel like one of the most important things they need to do, instead of putting Band-Aids on issues, they need to actually correct the issues. And I think they need to get more, I guess, pay more attention to what the families are saying instead of just dismissing us every time we come up with a concern and telling us that they can't fix it or they've already fixed it. And so I think that they need to listen to the families more and not their pockets.
Very good. I wish we had a lot more time, ladies. We might have to get together offline and commiserate together. So thank you all very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, again, want to echo what I heard Senator Tillis and Senator Sullivan say about contacting senators. Every base has 2 United States senators and 1 member of Congress. And if you can't get through to the local person, call the office. If you can't get through, call and come. Get families to come. Trust me, we pay attention when people show up at our doorstep. And I would go one step further. If anybody has a family member and you feel like is being retaliated by the military, call somebody on this committee and call the House committee as well. Go straight to the source. So with that, I don't have I'm almost at a loss for questions. I'd like to, Ms. Driver, in the interest of time, we had to kind of cut you off a little bit. Are there anything that you would like to add that you didn't get to in your statement? We're happy to hear that now in the remaining 2 minutes.
We caught them numerous times inside of our home after we had signed a statement that they were not allowed to enter our home without letting us know. We requested in writing results of 2 tests that we caught them doing, and we still have not received those tests. We paid to have our own testing done after they completed the work, and our tests show that the situation was far worse after they did their own remediation. We had Stachybotrys in our air samples in our living room that were only present in tape samples in the utility room before. The last air sample was done by a company hired by the company Housing had subcontracted to do the remediation. This is a huge conflict of interest. Housing sent us their final report showing Stachybotrys present in a bedroom. Despite this, they scheduled a final walkthrough of the house, stating it was safe for us to move back into. We went through the house with a project manager for Balfour Beatty and pointed out all of the mold they left during remediation and informed him that we would not be taking possession back of the home.
I think that may be about out of my time. I think, is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm sorry, but rest assured, all of your statements are going to be entered in full in the record, and we are all looking at them and reading them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Jones. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have only one question, and we'll try to be very brief with it. There has been a discussion about the possibility of a tenant's Bill of Rights. Have you considered that, and would you give me your thoughts about the possibility and whether or not that would have helped any of you in your situations?
Thank you. Just like a tenant's Bill of Rights or any kind of legislation that you put forth, if there is not an enforcement mechanism to that, it's not going to work. There has to be an enforcement mechanism to any kind of legislation or Bill of Rights, and I support a Bill of Rights. There needs to be something like that in place, but there has to be an enforcement and accountability mechanism, which is what we're lacking.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on it?
I agree. I just feel there's no accountability, and they're running all the way to the bank however often they're getting paid, and knowing nobody's watching and nobody's speaking up and nobody cares enough to stop paying them. And that's the only way this is going to stop, in my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop right there. I think other members have questions as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cornwall, can you speak a little bit to whether, or any of the ladies, if any of your spouses were retaliated against from the military side or were spoken to by their chain of command, or you said the GO said they're going to stay in their lane. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Upon leaving my husband's Mhpi, he did receive a phone call from his major that he was very upset that my husband hadn't kept him in the loop, which was actually not true either, because we also had a conversation with him about what was happening on the base. So while my husband didn't have anything in writing, my husband did receive a phone call.
Okay. Either one of...
My husband was never retaliated against, but I do want to say that his chain of command has been extremely helpful for the families coming forward now, that everything has come out in the media and they are aware of the issues. They have encouraged families to come forward and have said that they would help if there were families that needed the help.
My husband was never personally retaliated against. However, during the midst of our situation, and this happens numerous times, I've heard several people attest to the same situation. The housing communities will call our husband's command and tell lies, things that are completely untrue, trying to get our spouses in trouble. That happened to us personally. My husband's command did take our side in that situation, but that happens a lot where these housing companies reach out to command in order to try to get command in trouble, or to get the military person in trouble.
So they're outright either lying, not just intimidating, but outright lying to the
Absolutely.
chains of command?
Yes, yes.
That is absolutely unacceptable. Can you, any of you speak a little bit to, in the amount of time I have left, a little over a minute, to any type of disability accommodations or issues that you might have with disability issues? One of you has a daughter with a hurt knee, I believe.
My daughter has a rare genetic condition, and it affects her ability to walk sometimes. She has issues with her knees, and before we moved to Fort Meade, the Corvia staff assured us that since we were placed on the wait list in time, that we would be able to be accommodated with a one-level home. And just a few days before we arrived to Fort Meade, they told us that the house was no longer available. And when we explained to them the issue, we told them this when we signed for the house, when we signed the lease the first time, and also when they called us 5 days before arrival, that we did need a one-story home, but they said they didn't have anything left, and if we wanted a home, we had to take what was being offered, which was the townhome.
Did the chain of command or the Military Families with Special Needs Office do anything to help you in this case?
We didn't reach out to anyone because everything was just happening so quickly, and we were already just in the height of PCS season. It was the middle of the summer, and we didn't think that we would be able to have our needs accommodated. We didn't even sign into my husband's unit yet, so we didn't know who really to reach out at the time.
Thank you for your very brave testimonies, ladies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. Senator McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies, I also, like many on this panel, served. I served 26 years. I never did live on base. But as a former commander, as a former fellow patriot as you are, I'm infuriated by what I'm hearing today. This is disgusting. When your spouses raise their right hand to make the sacrifices and serve for our freedoms and our way of life, you also stood up to sacrifice. And you knew there were going to be some sacrifices to your careers and to moving around and all that comes with it. But not this. They were maybe going to go live in austere circumstances when they deployed. But this is in America, and American families that are putting up with health risks and sickness and harassment. We went to the private sector because the private sector, unlike the bureaucracy of the government, is supposed to be better, supposed to be more innovative, more responsive, more able to do customer service for our troops and their families. But instead, there's people that I hope look themselves in the mirror tonight and say, instead of being partners with our troops to make sure that our way of life is kept safe and free, they left you hanging. It put you in harm's way. This is so wrong and so angering to so many of us, and we have a lot of questions for the next panels and follow-up. If anyone in Arizona is listening, is having issues like this, I want you to please immediately call my office, 602-952-2410. But for those of you, even though your senator may not be up here, we have your backs. This is just the beginning. We're infuriated. I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here. This is wrong. On top of everything else you've been through, the emotional sacrifice, the inability, I can't even imagine your husband coming to work in my squadron every day, wondering if his family was going to be homeless the next day, and the impact that has on readiness and safety and everything. How much money are you all each out for the costs that you had to pay financially for tests and medical and everything else, on top of everything else?
I haven't totaled medical because it's not covered, and we've had numerous families that have tried to go to the MFTs to get referrals out to mold specialists they're being refused referrals to get to a mold specialist. With little tiny children, you ask if we have sick family members. We have a 5-year-old on base with lung cancer right now who will probably never be able to have children of his own someday. His house tested positive for aspergillus. The counts inside their home were 6 times higher inside their home than they were outside. Just our bedding and mattresses and replace essential. My home is basically empty. We have beds and we have pots and pans, but that alone has cost my family $40,000.
Oh my gosh. Ms. Weiner, how much are you out?
Personally, we're not out
Okay.
in Haas yet.
Okay,
That's
well,
to be seen.
Ms. Cornwall, Ms. Cornwall.
I ended up settling with Lincoln Military Housing for a mere $300. But I can say as an advocate from other military families, the cost to them has not been just in money, but to their health, which is long-term
Right,
effect.
exactly. I realize that's not the only cost, and I am out of time, but I just want to say the chain of command has got to be involved in this. Somehow we need the chain of command who's responsible for our troops, responsible for the readiness, responsible for our families, to be able to poke their finger in the chest of these companies and say, fix it now, or you're done. I yield back.
Yeah, I think that.
All right, thank you, Senator McSally. And this, we will now dismiss our first panel, and thank you very much for the testimony that you've shared with us. And we apologize on behalf of those who are the responsible parties, and we will correct it. Thank you very much. All right, we'll now ask the next panel to come forward. I'll probably pronounce some of these wrong here, but it would be Mr. Christopher Williams, President of the Balfour Beatty Communities, Mr. John Picerni, Founder of Chief Executive Officer of the Corvus Group, Mr. John Arrow, President of the Hunt Military Communities, Mr. Dennis Hickey, Chief Executive Officer, America's Lend-Lease Corporation, and Mr. Gerald Bliss, President, Lincoln Military Housing. We're going to start over here on your right and our left, and we're going to ask you to confine your comments to 3 minutes so that we will have a chance to get to all those who want to ask questions. Let's see. Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, Chairman Sullivan.
You need to put your mic on there.
I pushed it. Okay.
There we go.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, Chairman Sullivan, Ranking Member Kane, Chairman Tillis, and Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you for your invitation to testify today. Today's first panel touched me deeply. I know at Balfour Beatty, we want every service member and their family to have only positive experiences in housing. We're constantly working to meet that duty, and when we fall short, we try to make things right. Balfour Beatty Communities consider it an honor to serve those who serve our country. We strive to deliver quality and safe housing, to provide responsible maintenance, and create communities that support the unique housing needs of our families. Our employees pride themselves in promoting true sense of community throughout programming thousands of resident events, as well as modern amenities that do not exist before privatized housing. Balfour Beatty is responsible at 55 installations with the Army, Navy, and Air Force across the United States. Through these projects, we've delivered over 20,000 new homes and renovated over 20,000 existing homes. To ensure the replacement needs are met, approximately 93% of all net cash flows from our projects are deposited into a government-controlled project reinvestment account. To date, that amounts to more than $700 million. I will not forget my first experience in privatized housing. It was 16 years ago when my team met with General Blunt, at the time the commanding general of the Army's 3rd Infantry Division. He had just returned from Kuwait earlier in the day and was meeting to provide us input on what he wanted his soldiers and their families to be treated at Fort Stewart. It hit home to me and our team to know that in a few weeks' time, he would be sending our troops into harm's way with the Thunder Run up into Baghdad. From that day forward, I've maintained a deep respect and appreciation for the challenges faced by the military families. We're constantly learning from our experiences, both good and bad, and we're always looking for ways to improve our service. To that end, we recently had our mold and moisture inspection policies reviewed by a nationally renowned environmental firm, and we're implementing those recommendations with our routine maintenance practices. We're also adding additional resources. We've created a new position of resident engagement specialists. This is dedicated to on-site staff who engage directly with the customer to ensure those residents are being heard and getting prompt and complete answers to their questions and concerns. We've also engaged a third-party firm to provide preventative maintenance of our HVAC systems and central air systems. This will allow our maintenance technicians to focus on delivering greater levels of responsiveness and other maintenance areas. On behalf of the Balfour Beatty communities, including the hundreds of proud veterans and military family members who we employ, we're committed to listening to our residents and working with our DoD partners and committee to make privatized housing better. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Persundi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senators. I will be brief. My name is John Passern, and I'm the founder and CEO of Corvius. We're a mid-sized company made up of approximately 850 dedicated, hardworking people, alongside of our hundreds of small, minority-owned, disadvantaged subcontractors, take very personally our commitment to service members who defend our nation. It is in that spirit that I'm here to say, on behalf of everyone at Corvius, that we let down some of our residents. I am sorry, and we are going to fix it. We will get to the bottom of this problem, and once again, we will return to the gold standard of customer service that we once had. First, we're making life better for our residents today with a focus on customer service. Second, we're making organizational changes to ensure that our gold standard resident service is built in our operation. By adding staff to be in the neighborhoods, by reopening several neighborhood centers and amenities, by retooling our entire mold and mildew standards and policies, and by starting a major construction push while working with the Army and the Air Force leadership. We're tapping into more than $140 million worth of formerly trapped by reserve accounts by our investment groups. We're also investing $323 million in new dollars. This will provide for improving more than 2,600 homes in our communities. I know that we will get back to that gold standard place. We are proud to serve our military members, as we believe there is no higher calling in our business. I thank you for this time and look forward to your questions and thoughtful dialogue.
Thank you. Mr. Ely.
Chairman Inhofe and distinguished members of the subcommittees, good afternoon. My name is John Ale, President of Hunt Military Communities. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. At Hunt, we provide more than just housing. We're entrusted to build and sustain quality communities that meet the needs of those in uniform and their loved ones. We take that responsibility seriously. We're also committed to being a responsible partner to the Department of Defense. At Hunt, we've built approximately 15,000 new homes, renovated another 8,300 homes, and built 83 community centers. We've invested more than $5 billion in our communities and an additional $180 million in capital improvements in recent years. Today, we own interests in approximately 52,000 homes on or near 49 military installations in 21 states and the District of Columbia. Of that number, we manage about 32,000 units and serve more than 165,000 residents. We recognize that there is no such thing as maintenance-free housing, and that issues will arise that must be remedied with both our historic and newer homes. When that happens, we strive to address the situation in a timely and transparent manner, and we hold ourselves accountable. We're not perfect, and we aim to learn from our mistakes. I want to be clear, there is no acceptable percentage of unhealthy homes. Every resident deserves our best. Keesler Family Housing in Biloxi, Mississippi has been one area of special focus for us, so I'd like to speak directly to that. The military homes at Keesler were largely destroyed by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. After the homes were rebuilt, we found that residents were consistently identifying moisture-related issues. Addressing these issues proved difficult. We took ownership of the situation and have executed a multi-phase moisture remediation project. We have visited every one of the approximately 1,100 homes, assessed each home for moisture-related issues, developed a plan for each home as needed, and performed remediation work for each of those homes. I'm proud of the work we've done at Keesler, and we will continue to monitor and address any new issues with the utmost diligence. To the families that live at Keesler, we appreciate your service, and we are here to serve you. At Hunt, we do not succeed unless we provide our residents with safe and healthy homes. We agree with you that more can be done to accelerate the improvement of housing stock. We'd start with promoting common standards and sharing best practices. We also support the continued availability of housing allowances that facilitate options for our service members. Finally, let me say a word about the future. Over the next 5 years, we plan to invest over $500 million in additional capital improvements across our portfolio. This includes constructing 230 new homes to replace houses for residents in Hawaii. Those projects are expected to create hundreds of good-paying jobs. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to hearing your views and answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey.
Thank you, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reid, distinguished members of the Joint Subcommittee. My name is Dennis Hickey. I'm Chief Executive of Lend-Lease America. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify on our contribution to the military housing program. Lend-Lease is a global property company founded in Sydney in 1959, but we have been operating in America since 1970. As an Australian, I can attest that Australia, as the only country to have stood side by side with America and fought in every major conflict since World War I, is very proud to be a part of this program since its inception. Mr. Chairman, I would like to touch on the issues that are brought here today. This afternoon, we've heard from several families who have outlined the examples in a very material way of the serious problems that have arisen across some of the portfolios. The situation is clearly not acceptable, should have been avoidable, and I personally have great empathy for their cause. No family, much less a military family, should be subject to these conditions. We have 130,000 people living on our communities, and I can assure the members that we try extremely hard not to let these type of issues arise. However, unfortunately, we are human and mistakes do happen. I can assure the members that we are very focused on trying to learn from the stories that we hear today and learn from the committee's input to fix these situations moving forward. Despite the many successes and the strength of the military housing program, the program itself does bring some challenges. For example, the continued funding to continue with the remediation and continued betterment of the housing stock across the portfolios. Currently, Lend-Lease's communities have invested $7 billion into new construction and development across the portfolios, and we think that there is another $16 billion to invest over the life of the program. However, those funds are not evenly distributed across the projects. So the challenge for us is to actually find a way to get those funds to the areas that needs to be invested. Secondly, the safe and timely management, rectification and repair work of some of the environmental issues that existed on the base from pre-existing conditions is a real challenge, and we try very hard to address this every day. There is also the challenge of meeting occupancy levels. When military decisions are made around troop deployments that affect demand on the base, it is a challenge for the project companies to manage through those. And finally, there are challenges of managing various natural disasters that occur. Mr. Chairman, case in point is our Hurricane Florence that hit our Camp Lejeune project in September of 2018. This was an unprecedented natural disaster, and of the 6,200 homes on Camp Lejeune, 3,800 were affected. The repair bill alone for that project is over $150 million. Whilst we were slow to start, we've made good progress and we've repaired over 40% of the homes. Earlier this week, I met with Secretary Spencer of the Navy and other leaders of the Navy and Marines, and we talked about this specific issue. We're working together, collectively, and our goal is to have all of the homes repaired by the end of November. Mr. Chairman, finally, we are proud of the many accomplishments that we've achieved across our portfolio today, but we're also very aware that the issues that have been brought here today. The issues have my personal full attention, and I can assure you we are very focused on improving every aspect. We want our people who live in our communities to be proud, as our people are proud to serve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. Mr. Bliss.
Chairman Inhofe, Tillis, and Sullivan, Ranking Members Reid, Gillibrand, and Kane, and members of the subcommittees. On behalf of Lincoln Military Housing, thank you for the opportunity to testify before your subcommittees today on the Military Housing Privatization Initiative. My name is Gerald Bliss, and I am the president of LMH. I realize time is short, but I would like to recognize the service member families who just testified for sharing their experiences with you. The men and women of LMH work every day to serve all of our families with honor and integrity. I regret when even one service member family feels like we have come up short. I am sincerely and personally committed to working with our military families, our DoD partners, and your subcommittees to address any concerns with our operations and to foster better communication and understanding with those we serve. Obviously, one of the reasons we're here today is because there are families who feel like we did not perform up to expectations. Whatever the source of that frustration, whether it was a service problem or whether we didn't communicate well with the family, I deeply regret that any of our residents feel this way. While I believe the MHPI program is a true success for many thousands of military families, it is clear in the testimony of the families here today that not every family feels the same way. I want to change that. I want to regain the trust of these military families. As your subcommittees look at how LMH and other PPVs are performing, I look forward to working with you and our DoD partners to explore new and creative ways to improve our military families' experience in our housing. I look forward to your questions and, more importantly, to working with you to address the concerns of the military families.
Thank you, Mr. Bliss. We'll now have rounds of questions, not to exceed 4 minutes. The witnesses in the first panel singled out 3 organizations. They happen to be your organization, Mr. Williams, yours, Mr. Pacerny, and yours, Mr. Ells. So I'd like to have you make any comments or responses to those statements that were made concerning your organizations. You take those 4 minutes to do it, the 3 of you, starting with you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I heard loud and clear the drivers, Mrs. Driver, and her comments, and I take them extremely serious. At Tinker Air Force Base, we experienced a product failure with a plumbing system in 398 homes that were built several years ago. It was a manufacturer's product defect, and at one point we had over 500 water leak calls in to our offices. I will never make an excuse. We need to do better. We were managing in a crisis situation. We worked with the local command as well as AFCAC to develop a plan to go in and replace all of that plumbing systems. And I realized it was a major inconvenience as well as a true hardship to the residents that had to experience that, especially the drivers and the other families that were named in the article.
Yeah, we're running out of time here, so I'll leave it with that. Mr. Pacerny.
So, thank you very much for the question. And again, to all 3 of the families that presented earlier, we are at what I would call a critical inflection point in where our program is. And we know we need to get to the bottom of the challenges that we're facing. We have some new homes. We have some older homes that need major renovations. We've had some challenges in dealing with that. But specifically to the family that moved to Fort Meade expecting to have their child brought into a single family or single story home, it's unacceptable. And I absolutely, my company will stand up and will help and support that family and every family going forward in trying to make these things better. There was a time in place when that would never have happened, and again, we've made some shifts and changes according and with our governance partners, the United States Army, and those changes were not good. So we owe a debt of gratitude to their families, and we need help.
Thank you. Mr. L.
Senator, we heard families loud and clear. It's a heartbreaking story, and no one should ever have to go through that. And like I said, no percentage of unhealthy homes is acceptable to Hunt. We've got processes and procedures and protocols that we follow to work closely with our residents. It's our goal every moment, every day, to work in partnership with our residents to resolve their issues to completion and satisfaction. We do sometimes fall short. Whenever we do, we look back at those situations, try to learn from them. We're an accountable organization. If we find weaknesses in our organization, we tend to those. We will continue to do so, but we've got room to improve. We don't shy away from that. We own that. And we want to work with the stakeholders here to achieve a better MHPI program for all.
All right. Thank you. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have three questions which I'll direct individually, beginning with Mr. Williams, and I believe they require yes or no answers. First, do you affirm today that you will do everything in your power to immediately address the issues raised today by our military families, not just those who testified, but also by each of those who submitted testimony and information to the committee? Mr. Williams.
Absolutely, 100%.
Mr. Pacern.
Yes.
Mr. Elam.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hickey.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bliss.
Yes, Senator.
Second question is following up the Chairman's remarks. Communication with Congress in any form is a protected communication under whistleblower statutes. Do you affirm today that you will do everything in your power to protect the military families who have appeared here today, as well as those who have submitted testimony information to the committee, inspectors general, or their chain of command from reprisal, including threats or reprisal from your employees? Mr. Williams.
Yes, Senator.
Mr. President.
Absolutely, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Absolutely, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Finally, as you know, the GAO is conducting an ongoing review of the MHPI program. Do each of you guarantee complete cooperation with the GAO in their effort to obtain information and issue findings? Mr. Williams.
Senator, we have and we continue and will continue to.
Absolutely, Senator, we will.
Senator, we are happy to work with the GAO.
Absolutely, Senator.
Yes, Senator, we will continue working with the GAO as we have in the past.
Thank you. I think the testimony today, and including the first panel and your comments, suggests the system is broken. These problems were obvious to the military families, but they were not obvious enough to you to take effective correction action. So we have to think collectively, working with the Department of Defense and the service departments, to come up with appropriate incentives and disincentives so once again you don't take your eye off the target. And the target is very clear. As we've all stated, and we have to not just talk about it but do it with deeds, we owe an obligation to these families because of their service so that they live in the best possible housing, not that type of housing was described today. And we here, I know working with the chairman, will do all we can and do whatever we must to ensure that every military family and military housing does not have to worry about the health of their child, the safety, or their warmth in the winter, or their comfort in the summer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Tillis.
Thank you all for being here. I've got a couple of questions. Number one, sometimes when you see bad behavior, you guys I know are in the C-suite, the executive levels of your very large organizations that constitute about 80% of all the housing that's provided, and I guess probably another couple of dozen other firms. But one time in my past experience when I've seen bad behavior on the part of people further down the chain of command, it had to do with incentives and how they were compensated. Is any of your review of how this broke down going to go back to how the people in the chain of command that actually touched these homeowners actually behaved, because maybe they had some of their own personal livelihood at stake? Is that possibly a factor? Is that something you're going to look at? Just go down the line.
Yes, Senator, we are looking at that right now to make sure, first, we don't compensate on how we earn our incentives to our employees, but yes, we are looking at better ways to make sure that
yeah, because I'm just trying to figure out why on earth anybody who's working in this organization would have heard these stories and not move heaven and earth to try and get the right resource.
I agree.
On site. Mr. Pissarn.
Yes, Senator, I totally agree, and we are going to dig into, and we want to work closely with you and with the service branches to dig in deep and get to the bottom of this.
Mr. Earl.
Senator, we do have an incentive structure in our organization from top to bottom that already ties into things like resident satisfaction and maintenance service. So we're already there, but we're willing to take a continued look.
Yeah, because I'm looking at unit managers or other managers that may be compensated by bottom line impacts and how that could force a bad behavior. So I'm not only talking about the customer facing role, I'm talking about the people who are trying to balance the books and dealing with various issues. I'm going to assume you're going to give me similar answers, so I want you to look at it. Mr. Hickey, you said something that I'm curious. You seem to refer to funds being locked, which would be used to reinvest in hopefully outfit or address some of these problems. Can you explain that to me briefly?
Thanks, Senator. In short, each project company is set up that the revenue that comes in from the BAH pays all of the operating expenses.
And there are some 82 of these agreements over various stages, and I think you all constitute about 80% of them.
Something like that. The revenue comes in from the VHH collection. It pays all of the operating costs for running the base and fixing any capital improvements, etc. It then pays the debt service that has actually been used to do the first IDP round, and then the surplus account sits at the bottom, stays in an independent
And it's the surplus that you couldn't get distributed back into?
The surplus NOI stays at the base level. And therefore, if the base gets into a situation, it really only has the capacity to access its own surplus NOI. There are some agreements where they can share, but it's not uniform across the services.
Okay. The process of addressing, have things changed? When you first started this process, many of you have a couple of decades under your belt, others are newer to the process. Have the rules or the agreements changed between you and the DOD? I mean, what else could have possibly changed as creating stress on what would seem to me to be no-brainer business behaviors that for some reason fell down in some of these installations?
So, Senator, I would describe it as this is the largest and longest standing PPP or public-private partnership in America to this point. And the challenge that we faced 20 years ago was daunting and systemic, truly systemic. The solution that we came up with the Department of Defense and with you folks was something that would be able to solve, not just fix for the building new houses, but solve for the 50-year period. The challenge has been over the last several years, we have been moving in a direction of making sure that budgets are run at a very tight level, not as much focused on customer service and more about the NOI, net operating income, or the revenue account so that we have the dollars for the future. And I think we just tipped the balance too far. I know we tipped the balance too far. So we need to move it back to the middle, and we're all pretty much in agreement.
Right. The other thing, I'm just, we'll look deeply into these contracts and my role as chair of the Personnel Subcommittee. But I'm just trying to figure out some of the basic safety valves that didn't appear to be in place in terms of service level agreements, general satisfaction, escalation paths, the sorts of things that I did in a very different context in business seem to be missing here. So I'm looking forward to really drilling down on this. But I'm also serious when I tell you we're going to reach out. Let me just say one other thing in advance of the next panel. First off, don't be surprised if you don't get a call from my office if I get a lot of if I get a lot of constituent requests. I think I speak for most of my members. Expect to be on auto dial. But I will tell you, there is a problem in DOD that we've got to address as well, because at Camp Lejeune, you could actually have a family having a mold problem in their home. Then you can turn right back around and that Marine goes on base and they're working in offices that have mold, that have plastic on top of the roofs, and that we've got our own facilities to deal with. I mean, we've got Marines coming in on weekends fixing the roofs and trying to fix their offices. So we've got serious problems here. And that's why I don't want anybody to leave this meeting thinking it's any one entity that's at fault. Every single one of you have work that you've got to do, and we've got to do a top-to-bottom review to get it done. And I hope I have your commitment and the commitment of the other few dozen firms that aren't here before the committee but do the same thing for the whole DOD. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Tillis presiding, and Senator Gillibrand.
Let me begin by reiterating how frustrated I am by the experience of the families we have heard from today who live in houses under the management of your companies. In choosing to participate in the military housing privatization initiative, your companies didn't just land another real estate deal. You assumed responsibility for the safety, health, and well-being of military families who make incredible sacrifices each and every day in support of our national defense. In response to the recent reporting on problems in your housing units, many of you have pointed to satisfaction numbers showing resident approvals as high as 70 or low 80% ranges. However, those satisfaction surveys are clearly at odds with the heartbreaking testimony that we've heard today. And even then would still put somewhere between 20 and 30% of families in average or below average conditions. In written testimony submitted for this hearing, the Military Family Advisory Network states that they have conducted a survey with nearly 17,000 respondents and found, quote, more than half, 55.53% of respondents had a negative or very negative experience with privatized military housing. I would like each of you to answer the following questions. What percentage of military families do you believe deserve to live in excellent on-base housing?
Senator, 100%.
We agree, Senator, 100%.
100%, Senator.
Everybody, 100%, Senator.
100%, Senator.
How many military children deserve to be exposed to mold, lead, or other health hazards as a consequence of living in privatized housing units?
Senator, none of them.
I agree, Senator, 0.
0, Senator.
I agree, Senator, 0.
I also agree, Senator, 0.
Do you think it's easier or harder for a service member to focus on their military duties while also worrying about the health and safety of their families?
Harder, Senator.
It's always harder, Senator.
It's much harder, Senator.
No doubt much harder, Senator.
It's harder, Senator.
In so many of the stories that we've heard today from these families, the maintenance procedures that you've put in place have failed to ensure quality in housing units. In your written testimony, many of you pointed to quick response statistics for work orders in military homes. But if those issues aren't addressed properly, if mold is painted over or water damage misdiagnosed, families remain in danger. Further, many of the families have experienced cold and insensitive treatment from the local representatives of your companies, subsidiaries, and partners responsible for addressing the problem. Do you expect your staff working on installations as technicians to be capable of both remediating work orders and showing genuine concern for the families impacted?
Absolutely, Senator.
We would expect nothing less, Senator.
We absolutely agree, Senator.
Absolutely agree, Senator.
Yes, they should be able to do both, Senator.
How many contractors or service technicians have each of your companies fired for unsatisfactory performance in completing work orders in military housing?
I don't have that exact number, but it's multiple.
I also do not have exact number, but it's significant.
Senator, we are a company of accountability, and if someone's falling short of expectations, we take action.
Senator, I don't have the exact number on hand, but similar to the other organisations, we take it very seriously and we will move people on if they're not doing their work.
Senator, I don't have the exact number either, but we have made that decision to separate from personnel when they don't do the right thing and follow our policies and procedures.
Thank you for your testimony. From your answers, I can conclude that you agree this is something we must fix. It is an urgent issue. It does not represent our values as a country, and it does not sound like it represents your values as companies. So I expect your 100% commitment to solving this problem. Thank you.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just want to get from the panel a couple things. I'm assuming, as you've all indicated in your testimony, you believe this isn't just a opportunity to make money, and there's nothing wrong with making money in this capitalist society of ours, but it's also an opportunity to serve the men and women in the military, correct? And their families. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Let me just, there's one kind of overriding in some of the DOD responses in their testimony. It's a bit of a subtle theme. Actually, when I was reading it, it really kind of ticked me off. But this notion that, well, the service members have a choice where they're living. They can always go off base. I think one of our witnesses essentially says that in his written testimony, which I find ridiculous. So I just want to make sure that each of you aren't saying in your testimony or your belief is that, well, hey, they have another option, so if they don't want to live in a rat-infested home, they can just go off base. That's not the attitude here, is it?
No, Senator.
Absolutely not, Senator.
No, Senator.
No, absolutely not, Senator. I mean, the livelihood of all of our businesses rely on great customer service. We want people living in our bases, so customer service is at the heart.
That is not our attitude.
Okay,
as
good.
well. Thank you.
Because again, I think the whole idea, one of the things that I mentioned in my opening statement is, I think we can all agree that our military members, whether they have a choice to live off base or not, should have the highest quality of military housing when they're on base. So I think let's just all agree to that. But let me ask, and this is more kind of how this works. You build the housing, and then your contract, which are long, you're also in charge of all the maintenance and the upkeep and keeping the housing in a good living condition. Isn't that your responsibility as well?
Yes, Senator.
So that's part of the contracts. You don't have to all say yes, but that's part of the contracts, correct? It's not a base housing official at Camp Pendleton or something. It's you, right? You're responsible for that. So when you read about the mice and the mold, it's your responsibility to keep that up, correct? So get rid of it to have a nice house. Okay, let me ask this. I mean, we live in this Uber society, right? What would be wrong with having the military members be able to grade you on how well you do? You think that would be a good idea to maybe kind of somehow relate your contract performance to, that would empower the members a bit, right? To be able to say, hey, here's what I think's going on with my home. I got a bunch of mice in it. Nobody's coming. I think your service stinks. You think that would be a good reform maybe, that we could actually empower these courageous families who testified earlier to let them know and that we can see that? Would that be a good idea? More direct kind of
Senator,
responses?
We do survey. Our surveys.
But I'm not talking about surveys, because it looks like surveys.
I think we need to find a better way to get real touch points from the residents on a more real-time basis. And that's one of the things we need to commit.
But maybe tie it to your compensation.
Absolutely. Yes, correct.
Would everybody agree that has potential?
Yes, Senator, I think there's an opportunity to kind of get the residents on the base having a collective voice that can sit at the table with us and the service.
That they don't have to go through their chain of command to be heard
But they
by
can
you.
sit collectively, and we can do that as a...
Let me ask one final question. One thing that came up in the testimony before was this idea that somehow you or people who work for you might be taking advantage of a young Lance Corporal and his wife who just came on base and don't really know what's going on. I want each of you to definitively say that that's not the policy. You don't have people doing that. And if you do, you fire them. But maybe here's another suggestion, that maybe you look and do it the opposite way and maybe have a program to help the young Lance Corporal and his wife who are coming on base, and maybe do a proactive program to help these young guys. I mean, heck, they're barely teenagers, some of them, and their spouses. So can I get from each of you that you are definitively not doing that? And if you found people in your company who were doing that, you'd fire them?
If we found somebody doing that, we would fire them, and we are committed to making sure that that is not happening.
Senator, I agree wholeheartedly. We would never do that, and we would fire people if they did do that. And to answer your second question, we absolutely believe that in a proactive plan, helping our young soldiers as they first come on base is the right thing to do. We used to do it, and we're committing to going back to it.
Great.
Senator Hunt, if anyone were to do that, it would be against, first of all, our employee code of conduct, and yes, they would have to be dealt with or up to termination.
Yeah, likewise, Senator, it goes against every value that our company stands for, so it's totally unacceptable. And I think your suggestion of finding a way to help the younger people more proactively is a good one.
I agree, Senator. That is totally against our character, and if anybody at Lincoln is acting that way, they would be terminated.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kane.
Which of you served in the military? Did any of you serve? I didn't either, so there's no shame in that. But how about this? Have any of you ever lived on a military base as a military dependent, like, when your mom or dad were in the military?
I've never had an experience of living in family housing.
And is that the same for all of you? I think that's pretty important. I mean, I think that's an obvious, really important sensitivity issue. This is a really important hearing, so each of these companies, you're sending a really important person here who's a person with some authority and responsibility to answer our questions. And if at the top of these institutions we don't have people who understand the lives that folks are leading in the military, I think that is maybe the beginning of an issue. In your government contracts, are you required to do surveys of your military tenants?
It's part of our incentive program.
Yes, we do. We do, along with our government partners, do multiple surveys.
Yes, our compensation incentive program is tied to resident satisfaction surveys.
And do you do those on your own? Do you write the survey yourself?
There's a third-party independent company that provides those surveys, and we have no access to it other than we get the final report.
Likewise, Senator, we do in-depth custom surveys with third party. We review all of the output of that with our respective service partners.
And is that third party, and it's not the military, it is some third party?
No, it's a third party
survey
organisation.
company.
And we produce that and review that with our military
Mr.
partners
Bliss?
regularly.
Yes, we also have an independent third-party survey company. Additionally, we have another independent survey company that surveys after each work order service request.
I think there should be a kind of an SOP of a template that would be a survey that military families and dependents who live on bases would be given the opportunity annually to do a survey, and that would go to the requisite office with the military, so that groups like the MFAN wouldn't have to do their own survey to figure out what's going on. I think a customer satisfaction survey that would be an annual for everybody living in military housing, that would be a template, apples to apples questions would be really important. You could see who were the better landlords and who were the worst ones. You could see, are there particular bases that are unusually bad? And that might suggest there's some infrastructure needs on the base that we could address that aren't purely yours. So I think a apples to apples template regular survey with the information going directly to the military, so we wouldn't have to rely on outside groups to tell us what's going on with families, would be a good idea. Let me ask you this. You would agree with me, would you not, that somebody living on a military base shouldn't have worse housing or have housing that is substandard compared to housing in the community where they live with respect to building codes, environmental standards, et cetera, right? The military family shouldn't be worse than the surrounding communities. Is that a fair statement?
I think it should be better.
Shouldn't military housing have to comply with building and environmental codes in, say, Fort Belvoir's in Fairfax County? Why shouldn't military housing on that base have to comply with local building and environmental codes, including inspections by Fairfax County building and environmental inspectors? If these folks want to call and complain, shouldn't there be, I'm thinking like a mayor. I used to be a mayor. We had a code compliance section. I think they ought to be able to go into housing in Fairfax County, whether it's on a military base or not, and determine whether something complies with codes or is in violation of codes. Would that cause any challenges for y'all?
So I think there is a wide variety of challenges, and I think that is an issue that we need to look at. We do adhere to all of the national standards, and we do have, again, the best we could find third-party inspectors who do all of that inspection work. However, the challenge I think that may be presented is at a place like Fort Bragg, where Fayetteville is not a large place. If we were to do a large, which we're about to do, a couple $100 million worth of work, we may overwhelm the Fayetteville office for inspection and code compliance. So I think there's something there as we start to dig into the bottom and get to kind of where the real challenges are. I think there's a way to do that in a very meaningful and significant way that adheres to or gets to the heart of what you're trying to get to, which is...
I'm over my time, but I'm just thinking if these folks can't get an answer out of a private housing provider, if they feel like their family readiness specialist is being intimidated against, if they can't get the chain of command to help them, where could they go? Most people in a city would call a local building officer, and they would come out and somebody would do an inspection that would validate or verify whether, in fact, the property was subcode. And it would seem to me, since you've all agreed with me, that somebody shouldn't be subjected to housing worse than the sets of rules in the community where the housing is, it would seem to me to be an obvious potential solution. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, first of all, I'm just curious. It seems to me that this should never have gotten to the point where it required a congressional hearing to get to the bottom of it. And I think you've all been notified in advance of the need to come and speak to us. How much time did you have to prepare for this meeting today? If you could just get on the line, how much time did each of you have?
Less than a week.
Yeah, several days, Mr. Senator.
Yeah, just about that.
Same.
About the same time, Senator.
A few days anyway. Was there a sense of panic when you were asked to come and testify?
Senator, no, I welcome the challenge. We need to do better as a provider, and we want to work with the committee.
Mr. Williams, here's the reason why I ask. It would appear to me that either you knew that you had a problem to begin with and it had not been resolved, or this came as a complete surprise to you. And it would appear to me that that's part of the question here is were you aware you had a problem and you just couldn't figure out a way to fix it yet, or did this come as a surprise to you, any of you?
So, Senator, this it came up as partly a surprise about 8 months ago, 9 months ago, and as we peeled it back and peeled it back and peeled it back, it became a bigger and bigger challenge. I am not panicked to be here today, although I will not say this is the happiest experience of my life. This is not where I ever wanted to be getting into this business. I felt like we were here committed to taking care of the service members who defended our nation. And again, the idea that we've let them down is deeply disturbing to me, and I am here to try to make sure it's
look, let me just ask this of all of you then. What was, after you found out a couple of days ago that you're going to be in front of us, if there was one critical issue that you said, I know we got to fix it, I know they're going to hit us on it, what's the issue that's got to be fixed that's in front of us today that each of you, and I just very quickly, what was top of mind on got to be fixed now?
The interface with the resident.
I would agree, interface with the command and the resident.
Yeah, communications with our residents and our partners.
Yeah, the sharing of communication so that everybody is informed and everyone's operating on the same information set.
I think for me, it was allowing a voice for the residents, a place to go. I think Senator Kane hit on it. They don't feel like they have a place to go. We need to figure out a process that allows them where they feel they're aptly represented when issues come up.
How much of the damage that's been done out there, how much of it has been because of construction that was of poor quality to begin with, and you're managing products that have a poor quality in the construction itself from day one? Mr. Williams?
I think it's twofold. We have had an issue with some product that we bought to build some of the houses that have failed. It's a manufacturer's defect. But we also have an inventory. Our inventory ranges from the early 1800s to 2016. So when we took on a lot of that legacy, those historical homes were quite the challenge. As we look at those historical homes, they become harder and harder and harder to pay for that type of work while continuing to balance to provide the services for the other residents.
Thank you, and that should be noted. Mr. Stern?
Yeah, I think the same holds true for our portfolio as well. Once we realized that you couldn't replace and build brand new all of the homes, then trying to find a way to balance maintenance and care on the existing program as well as saving up the dollars to rebuild. And we don't have a systemic construction problem. We have a systemic maintenance problem.
Mr. Eiley? I'm running out of time, but if you could quickly.
Senator, except for Keesler, where I can't speak to the Milcon construction of those houses, we did find that we had to do some repair to the HVAC ductwork in those for the condensation. But elsewhere, if we're having problems, it's generally not in the newer homes. It's in the legacy homes that have yet to be replaced.
Thank you. Mr. Hickey?
Yeah, Senator, likewise. We've demolished 15,000 homes. We've built new 16,000 homes. We still have 25,000 that are legacy homes. They're the majority of the issues. Almost all of the issues are contained within those set of homes.
Mr. Bliss?
Similar, Senator, it's the legacy homes, the age. Our homes also range from 1800s to the 2010s.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. For the record, the committee reached out to the government relations counterparts in each of your organizations on January the 28th. The official notice of this hearing was on January the 31st. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we don't have much time, I'll just go straight to it. I sent letters to each of you last week to learn more about how you make your money and what recourse tenants and taxpayers have if you fail to uphold your side of the bargain. Your agreements are not transparent, they're not publicly available, but basically you make your money in two ways: management fees and distributions based on performance. So you all stressed in your written testimony that your management fee is partially based on resident satisfaction and quality of service. So I just want to unpack this. Mr. Williams, I'll use you for the example. Say there's mice and mold in all of your units and the tenants are unhappy. Do you still get paid a base fee?
Yes, Senator.
So you're going to get paid that, and then how much more you get paid is going to be your performance fee, right? And the idea is the performance fee will be withheld if the place is filthy, if it's overrun with rats, and so on. So, Mr. Williams, Balfour Beatty manages 43,000 homes across 55 military installations. Across that portfolio, how many times has this performance-based fee been completely withheld in the last 5 years?
Senator, I don't have that specific data, but I can tell you that we have had our incentive fees or a portion of our incentive fees withheld.
Well, I know, but what I want to know is how often. I mean, this is why I sent you the letters to ask about this. Have you ever had them withhold and just say, you don't get your performance fee because the place is full of rats?
We have had our incentive fees withheld.
Completely withheld?
I don't have that.
You're not sure if they've ever been completely withheld?
At this point, no, but I will get, when we answer your letter, I will give you that.
Okay, Mr. Pissarro?
So, Senator, our incentive fees have never been 100% withheld.
Okay, so never. Mr. L?
Senator, there are multiple components to our incentive fees, so...
I'm asking if they've ever been completely withheld.
not 100%.
Never. So you guys have still been getting incentive fees in all these stories going on. Mr. Hickey, has yours ever been completely withheld?
Sorry, Senator, they're calculated on a base-by-base basis, and we have been withheld on some of the bases, but never across the
Never.
same basis.
So that's just, no, you've never had them completely withheld. Mr. Bliss?
Yes, Senator, they have been reduced, but they've never been completely.
That's not a yes, it's a no. Okay, you've never actually had any of them completely withheld. So the way these deals are structured, you're also guaranteed a return on your investment in the project every year. So if operating expenses are high one year because a house needs a new roof or the place is full of mold, DOD authorizes you to raid the reserve fund for the project instead of cutting into your profits. Is that correct, Mr. Williams?
Senator, I don't believe that's how it works. We don't raid the operating expenses to pay for other things. After all the bills are paid, it goes into account.
No, I said the reserve fund. That's the whole point. You don't, so if one year you have to put up a bunch of roofs, you have a reserve fund and use that, which is how it is that year after year after year after year, you manage to make a profit in this. I look at your annual reports, and what I see is that all in, about 3% of the taxpayer-funded rent that you collect from service members goes straight into your pocket, even if the homes are disgusting. And that usually that number is closer to 5%. So I just want to understand, I'll try to do this as quickly as I can, what that adds up to in dollars. And I sent you a letter to ask you this, so I'm sure everyone has the number ready. And that is, what is your company's annual profits, including the base fee and the performance fees and any other fees you collect, for your agreements with DOD on privatized housing? Mr. Williams?
Our net profits for our military housing business are around $33 million.
A year.
A year.
Thank you.
Pre-tax.
Mr. Pissarro?
Our net profits are closer to $12 to $14 million.
12 to 14 million. Mr. L?
Senator, as a private held company, Hunt doesn't disclose those, but I can take that back to my team. We can get you something in afterward.
Mr. Hickey?
Senator, the same. We will give you that information in response to your letter.
All right. Mr. Bliss?
Yes, Senator, as a privately held company.
All right. So thank you. I apologize for running over, Mr. Chairman, but I think this is important, and this isn't right.
Senator Rounds, briefly before we go to Senator McSally.
Mr. Chairman, I just make the point. Think about this. If we actually issued notices out between the 28th and the 1st of February, and you only had a couple of days, I mean, someplace within your organization, somebody had that information. And if it takes that long for that information to get to you from a congressional request, think about what that says about how tough it is for a young enlisted man or their family to get to you with a problem. And I think that's part of the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The stories we heard today and those that represent many other families that were not heard today, and their similar horror stories of living on base and privatized housing by several of our companies are disgusting, as I've said earlier. From my view, having been in the military, they do not just represent a one-off situation or a rare situation that just wasn't handled well by one employee, by one situation, whatever, one family, one house, one contractor, but systemic issues. I think back to, again, when I was a commander, you have a culture in your team of how you're going to deliver and partner with our military. You're all talking about being partners. But you are in charge of the culture of that team, how they respond to our military families, how they respond to customer service, how they make sure the contractors that go out there are identifying whether something is a health hazard, how they notify the individuals, how they get them out of the house fast to make sure their kids aren't sick. Like, that's all like a whole chain of events that needs to happen in how you are executing these contracts, in partnering with the DoD to serve our military men and women and their families. And this is multiple layers of failure for these incidents that we heard today. Multiple layers that, to me, comes down to like cultural issues. And there's been many failures here. And I hope all of you can look these service members and their families in the eyes and tell them that you're sorry, but then do the right thing, starting now. I hope you feel embarrassed. Starting now, do the right thing, the next right thing, in order to take care of this. Mr. Williams, when did you find out about the driver's situation?
Right after the drivers moved out, I found out about the driver situation, and then once the Reuters article came out, I really dug into what was going on there.
Now, I understand. I don't expect you to know about every single situation of every single house, I get that. But the fact that a story was told like we heard today somehow did not rise up to the level of, like, we got a problem. And this is a situation of a family, but man, what else is going on in this organization? So since this has been brought to your attention, what else have you done immediately in order to address the culture, to hold people accountable? Who's been fired? Who's been held accountable? What else are you changing in your team in order to fix this?
Senator, we have gone back and looked at everything where it broke down, and as I stated earlier today, one of the challenges that we had was the failure of the plumbing system. As we do that audit, when I find out where the breakdown happened, there will be ramifications to everybody who failed to inform us about this situation.
Mr. Williams, I get that there's a failure of the plumbing system, but do you hear the story? They find mold. It's time to alert them there's mold. This is dangerous to your family. Let's get the family out. Let's get them into a safe circumstance. That's more than just a faulty pipe. It's what happens next. So can I ask, are you committed now that if any of you hear of anything that comes in any of your units or anyone on your team that is a hazard or is dangerous to any of these families, that they're going to immediately be notified and they're going to be put into safe housing, sustained safe housing until it's resolved? Can I get that commitment?
100%.
Absolutely, Senator.
Life safety issues are our #1 priority.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Senator.
All right. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that a lot of the questions that I asked have probably already been asked, so I apologize that I had to go to another hearing. But I'd like to ask from you folks, because basically you are on the hot seat. You manage among you hundreds of thousands of units of military housing, correct? Okay. So do you all acknowledge that you can do more to make sure that the military housing you provide is safe, clean, and habitable?
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Let's go down the line. That you want to be part of the solution, so that's good. Do you have to have a reserve fund, right, to take care of things like fixing roofs and getting rid of persistent mold and all of that. Who determines how much is in that fund?
That fund is determined by the cash flow that flows through the project and down into the waterfall that then is deposited into a government-controlled fund. And then we and the services determine what the long-term plan is to spending that.
So is it basically that you all decide how much should be in the reserve fund?
No, Senator, the reserve fund is the result of the net cash flow that comes out over a period. The revenue comes in, operating expense.
Yes.
And then the debt service back, everything goes into the reserve fund, and that accumulates. And then we put recommendations to the military service, and together we'll work out where those funds get spent.
Well, how much of those reserve funds go for things like repair and maintenance?
100%.
So debt service is for repair and maintenance?
No, debt service comes out before the reserve fund, Senator.
Okay.
So debt service comes out, balanced into the reserve fund. The reserve fund is used for repairs and maintenance and new construction and...
So by the time, so what percentage of your reserve fund out of once you do the debt service and all of the other things that you have to do, how much is left for the reserve fund for the repair and maintenance of your units?
On most of our projects, it's somewhere between 16 and 18%.
Do you think that is adequate?
I think that I don't actually think it's adequate, and I think that's what has driven us partly to the place that we're in today. So as we try to create smaller expense accounts to try to be more efficient in how we served the families and maintain the families, which directly related to how much money would go into the reserve accounts.
So there's...
So the maintenance...
I think I'm running out of time.
That's okay. So let me just quickly...
Yes.
So on a daily basis, the families that we are dealing with who have issues in their homes, that would come out of our operating expenses. The reserve accounts are to deal with the rebuilding, modernization or revitalization of the homes.
But including things like eliminating persistent rodent infestation, all of those things, that comes out of the reserve fund. And there's no law that requires all of you to have a certain percentage in the reserve fund. Is that correct? What do you think if we impose such a requirement? You wouldn't like it.
Senator, there is a minimum amount of deposit that needs to go into the reserve accounts before anything else can happen. So it's in our documents. It was agreed upon with our military partners in the outset. Okay.
We may need to revisit the adequacy of the reserve fund in light of all of this testimony, and I do thank all of the people who have shown the light on this. I was looking at, part of the concern is, of course, the disclosure that goes to the homeowners, and I'm looking at one. This is 2 pages, single-spaced, and it talks about pesticide-impacted soil, and the residents have to sign this form. And there is such a thing as forms that are easy to read, and I do not think this is an easy-to-read form. So I would ask that if all of you have, I assume you all have to have these disclosure forms that covers various kinds of dangers and hazards that may be in the home. I would ask you to review these forms, because if I were wanting to get into housing, I would probably just sign this form and not necessarily read it as carefully as one should. So simplifying your form is something that I think would make a big difference in terms of meeting any notice requirements. I say I'm out of time, so I do have a few other questions that I can submit for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Eel, you've got a couple of properties in Alabama, at Redstone and Montgomery. Following up what Senator Round said, I'm assuming for a moment that you can't express surprise about any of this coming up today, since 2 years ago, Lieutenant Governor of Alabama, now Governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, sent a letter to the Secretary of the Air Force complaining about the complaints in the standard housing at Maxwell. This past year, 2 years later, the same newspaper ran an article that was titled, "Substandard Maxwell Gunner Base Housing Has Military Families Up in Arms." Now, I recognize from that article that there's been some improvements there, but obviously there's still a long way to go. And I'm not going to ask you to take the time today to go into those. What I would like for you to do is to commit to, within a couple of weeks, get me a full report on what you've done and where you're planning to go, because 2 years is a long time. And some of those houses are older, I get that. But, those families are suffering. So will you commit to do that for me?
Yes, Senator.
All right, thank you. I want to follow up just quickly. You may want to explain this, you may not, for each of you. Ms. Cornwall, and I think it was backed up by our other two witnesses, said one of the things that could be done quickly to try to help alleviate this problem, and you've all identified and talked about communication, and I agree with that. But one of the things that she said that was backed up by everybody is withholding the allowance, for the housing allowance, until the things are corrected. Now, I recognize, I'm a lawyer, and so I understand that you can't just do that on a complaint. But would you oppose the withholding of that allowance if a system is in place that would give you, one, adequate time to correct the problem, but also correct a problem that has been documented? Would you oppose that for each of these families that are having so much problems? And if so, I'd like to know why.
No, Senator.
No, Senator, I think there is a reasonable mechanism that will withhold dollars until things are fixed. I think that makes sense.
All right.
No, Senator.
No, Senator, we wouldn't, but I think it's also part of trying to actually install an arbitration or a type of a regime that gives people a voice that can actually sit and adjudicate over these issues that most of the families have raised that they've not been able to do today.
Good. We'll come right back to that, Mr.
No, Senator.
All right, that's great. Well, I'd like for, again, I'm going to make another request. I'd like each of the five of you to give us something of what you think that would look like, so that this committee can consider it and talk to your military partners about implementing that. Going back, Mr. Hickey, to what you just said, what would you see would be a good mechanism? Because I agree with you completely. Because if there is no ability to redress and you complain and complain and complain, there's just not much going to happen when money's involved. So let's find a way. What would you suggest would be a good way for these families to be able to seek some redress, whether it's arbitration, mediation, or whatever?
Thanks, Senator. I think, on a base-by-base basis, you need to establish a forum for the local people to be able to come and express their concerns and to work with ourselves, plus the service partner, plus the community under the residents. So I think what that structure looks like, we can work on that. I think we can use best-case examples from other industries and other areas. But I think if we can create that environment, I think that goes a long way to actually giving people a clearer voice.
So you're, and I don't disagree with you, your concept would be to establish an overall framework, but let the individual base and their commanders work with the communities and others that are interested to come to some resolution agreement that can come forward. Something along those lines?
Yeah, I think it's important to bring it back to a base level, because I think if you introduce something too high up, it becomes cumbersome, et cetera. So I think that, there may be scales of that.
Well, I don't disagree with that, because obviously it hasn't gone too far up with each of your companies right now, so we got to figure that out. So thank you all for the commitments, and I look forward to getting your responses in the very near future, in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming and testifying today. We have, for certain people that come before us, they have an obligation to respond to questions for the record. You do not have an obligation, but we would ask that if you receive questions from the Senate members, that you try to respond to them promptly over the next 2 weeks. We thank you for being here. I particularly look forward to solving these problems and seeking your feedback on the interface to government and other things that need to be made better so you can do your job better. But we've got to do a better job. And in the meantime, as I said before, I speak for every Senate member when I say, if you're living in military housing anywhere in this country and you're not getting satisfaction from any of these vendors, call your Senate offices and we'll be in touch. You may now step down. Thank you very much again. We're going to seat the next panel. Thank you all for being here. In the interest of making sure we can get to questions, so I would ask you to try and keep your opening comments to about 4 minutes. Submit written statements to the record. We'll start with Secretary McMahon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ranking members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this very important topic. I'd like to begin by thanking the family members that were here for bringing and having the courage to come forward and talk about what they did in a very difficult environment. We appreciate not only what do they do, but more importantly, what they do in support of their spouses. What we heard from them reinforces what we already knew, and that we collectively have to do significantly better. For those of us that have lived in military housing before privatization, and I lived in 9 different base homes during my 34-year military career, we know that privatization was the right decision and that the quality of privatized housing is significantly better than when DoD managed it. However, for more than 80% of our current military population who didn't experience the poor housing conditions of the past, this is all they know, and they expect us to get it right 100% of the time. As you all know, 70% of our military members live off base. For the 30% that live on base, our goal is to offer them a safe, high quality, and affordable home where they want and choose to live. And although our current independently generated satisfaction rate with privatized housing runs approximately 85%, and those are 2017 numbers, we, as I said before, must and will do better. I had the opportunity to meet with our partners as well as my service counterparts on the 1st of February and talk about the issues that we face. And it became clear to me from that meeting that we need to focus in 3 areas, and it's much of what our family members said. We need to improve upon communication, we need to improve upon engagement, and we need to improve upon responsiveness. Both groups are fully in sync, and that's where we intend to go. And at the same time, we have to work to ensure that the long-term viability of our privatized housing projects. Integral to that responsibility is ensuring the fiscal structure of our current projects assures us that these projects will be just as healthy in 15 to 25 years. In closing, the Department of Defense and our industry partners are fully committed to the complementary goals of first, ensuring that today's residents of privatized housing have a safe, high quality, and affordable home where they want to live and choose to live. And second, ensuring the long-term viability of our privatized housing projects so that our future residents, 20 years from now, have exactly the same thing. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Secretary Beeler.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members and distinguished members of the Joint Subcommittee on Personnel and Readiness and Management Support, thank you for this opportunity both to testify on the current state of the Army's Military Housing Private Initiative and to answer any questions you may have. I look forward to working with each of you to achieve our mutual goal of providing safe and secure housing on all of our Army installations, which directly impacts the readiness, welfare, and quality of life for our soldiers and families. First, I want to address the concerns of our Army family members heard during the first panel. The Army and its leaders at every level down to each Army installation are taking your concerns seriously. All levels of command are actively working to address the problems you have highlighted. Their focus in mind is to ensure the safety and well-being of the soldiers and their families who choose to reside in privatized housing. We are all committed to providing safe, secure living environment. The Army's #1 priority continues to be readiness, and that very much begins with our families, including exceptional family members. I would like to introduce for the record at this point a statement on behalf of the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. We are deeply troubled by the recent reports highlighting the difficult conditions in some of our family housing. It is unacceptable for our families who sacrifice so much to endure these hardships in their own homes. Our most sacred obligation as Army leaders is to take care of our people, our soldiers and family members. We are fully committed to provide a safe and secure environment on all of our installations. We have directed an Inspector General investigation and have taken other actions. We will hold our chain of command and private contractors accountable to ensure they are meeting their obligations to provide safe, high-quality family housing. And we are going to Fort Meade tomorrow with Army senior leaders to get to the bottom of the situation at Fort Meade. With that, I welcome any and all of you to visit an installation with me to engage directly with the Garrison team and visit family, homes, and service members. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you today and for your continued support of our soldiers, civilians, and families. Your oversight is always welcome in order to provide the best service to our soldiers and families. I look forward to your questions.
Secretary Bear.
Good afternoon. Senator Reid, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue. It's a very important topic, and I want to start out first by, on behalf of Secretary Spencer, for the Navy and the Marine Corps families, and particularly for the ladies here today, I want to apologize for the horrible experiences that you have experienced in your families and in your homes, and we're responsible, and we're going to fix it. And with that, Secretary Spencer and I are fully dedicated and committed to ensuring that all Marines and sailors and their families live in safe, secure housing that meet or exceed health and safety standards. We are committed to families first. 75% of our service members live in off-base housing, and that's 25% of our members are in on-base privatized housing. Across the department, we have 62,700 privatized homes. Since Congress passed the Military Housing Privatization Initiative, the Navy and the Marine Corps have leveraged this private sector investment to obtain the equivalent of $9.8 billion of improved housing with only $1.5 billion of Navy or taxpayer investment. Prior to privatization, government-owned family housing resident satisfaction scores ranged from average to good. And I know you've heard a lot about this, and I'm not throwing this up for an excuse, and by no means, but today our resident satisfaction scores range from very good to outstanding and overall, and it is better than what it was when the government had our housing, where we just did not have the discipline to compete with other funding priorities to have quality housing. As we all know from our own housing, maintenance issues are a constant effort, and we must strive to do better. In 2001 and 2011, the Department of the Navy learned many lessons from a mold incident with our privatized homes in Norfolk, Virginia. Based on that experience, the Navy incorporated better management practices to address the environmental hazards in our privatized housing. From that experience, with our Navy CNIC, we developed a standard operating manual, which was a copy was sent to each of you. And I'll only point this out because this SOP was developed for environmental hazards in privatized housing. It's particularly focused on environmental hazards such as asbestos, carbon monoxide, lead-based paint, radon, security mold, water infiltration, and pest infestation. The SOP provides enhanced oversight of privatized houses through prescribed actions and notifications through the chain of command to ensure our service members' needs are addressed. The SOP also increases the visibility of property management response times pertaining to health and safety issues, and it helps the Navy hold our partners accountable in their delivery of services to sailors, Marines, and their families. At each installation, the Navy and the Marine Corps maintain an installation housing office that monitors our partners' performance. Any significant or systemic concerns are elevated in accordance with our SOP. It is evident that there are cases where we and our housing partners did not meet our expectations. We will hold our partners and ourselves accountable. It is clear that our SOP has not always been followed because the procedures here are written with the intent to address these needs. And you have my commitment and that of Secretary Spencer's that we are looking into this problem. Thank you.
Secretary Henderson.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members, Ranking Member Reed, Ranking Member Kane, and distinguished members of the committee, it's an honor to represent our airmen, our Air Force civilian, and our senior Air Force leaders at this hearing today. My full written statement is submitted for the record, where we articulate some of the background about the Air Force privatized housing initiatives, some of the challenges we're currently having, and what specifically we're doing about it. The safety and health of our airmen is our highest priority, and we share their frustration with the housing challenges that they're experiencing at some of our bases. These challenges distract our airmen from their mission. This is unacceptable, and we all must do better. Now, my assessment, and that's an assessment based on spending 18 years during my active duty career in some of the very housing run by the folks behind me, and my assessment based on my time in this position, for what ultimately determines whether a military family has a positive or negative experience in military housing has everything to do with the on-site leadership managing the housing at each location. Generally speaking, where the Air Force has had problems with poor construction quality, which has led to a lot of the mold problems, mismanagement of maintenance requirements, or unresponsive customer service, ultimately the root cause can be linked to a breakdown in communications, a breakdown in oversight and leadership at the site where it matters the most. Now, challenges with facility degradation can be expected and are unavoidable in property management, but there's no excusing any instance where these issues go unaddressed or allowed to persist to a point where they're impacting the quality of life of airmen and their families. So whether it's the construction companies who build our homes, the project owners who operate and maintain them, or the on-site management teams who serve our airmen, if their highest priority is not aligned with our highest priority, there is no room on the Air Force team for them. To this end, the Air Force will continue to exercise proactive leadership and own these challenges by holding our private sector partners and our on-site leadership accountable for meeting our quality of life, health, and safety requirements for our airmen and their families. Please accept our sincere gratitude for your demonstrated support for the Air Force and the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
I'm going to defer to Senator Reed. He has another commitment. He'll go ahead of me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, secretaries, men and ladies and gentlemen. Since you are literally the partners of the private housing companies, I want to ask you the same questions I asked them, and I think a yes or no answer is appropriate, beginning with Secretary McMahon. Do you affirm today that you will do everything in your power to immediately address the issues raised today by military families here and also by those who have testified and submitted material to the committee? Mr. Secretary.
Yes, Senator, I will.
Mr. Secretary Beeler.
Yes, Senator.
Secretary Baer.
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Senator.
And as the Chairman stressed, communication with Congress in any form is a protected communication. The whistleblower statutes. Do you affirm today that you will do everything in your power to protect the military firms who have appeared here today, as well as those who submitted testimony and information to the committee, the Inspector General, the chain of command from reprisal? And I would, just as a caveat, I was a little distressed when the implication is that the chain of command was not as responsive, and in fact, indeed, retaliated against some of these complaints. Secretary McMahon?
Yes, Senator, I will.
Secretary Beeler?
Yes, Senator, I find retaliation totally unacceptable and will do everything in my power to make sure it never happens.
Secretary Baer?
Absolutely, Senator.
Secretary Henderson?
Absolutely, Senator, and I would follow on that the Secretary of the Air Force and Chief of Staff have initiated an IG investigation to look exactly into those mechanisms that allow our families to raise these concerns in an environment that's free for communication and allows the chain of command to act.
Well, thank you very much. I think one of the things that we have to do is provide incentives and appropriate disincentives, and it strikes me, listening to testimony, the questions of my colleagues, particularly the very, very thoughtful testimony of the family members, that what we need is, in some respects, a military housing ombudsman on every post that's empowered. We have them, but they're not empowered. that they would be the ones, as a representative of the families, not the company or the chain of command, that would certify that the housing is quality housing, not just adequate, but quality housing. And from that certification might flow the retention of part of the housing allowance, some financial indication that would be appropriate. Secretary McMahon, let me just ask you, is that something that you could work on or will work on?
Senator, we have to find a different way to both incentivize and disincentivize. I'd have to have a lawyer in the room to figure out what we can do with the legal documents, what is within the art of the possible. But we have to find solutions to get to a better position than we are today.
Well, I understand, but part of this, I think, is sitting down with the companies and, if necessary, renegotiating aspects of the contract so that we can protect the families. That's something I think should be done.
Yes, sir, I agree with that, and we've already begun that process. I meet again with him next month to continue this journey to figure out how we can collectively provide a better level of service to our residents.
Just a final comment. It's surprising to me, and I think my colleagues on the committee, that, you know, in particular, let me commend Senator Tillis and his colleagues on the Personnel Committee. They spend a lot of time with DOD personnel, service personnel, asking questions about what's going on, how can we help the servicemen and women and their families. And this issue seems to have caught us by surprise, which suggests that we have to go back and look at, you know, you're doing surveys that, and the survey is showing 85% approval. The companies are doing surveys that's showing 85%. But then an independent party does a survey and it's 55. I just think we have to go and step back among the many missions we have and not be caught by surprise again. I think I'm pleased by the testimony in some respects of the companies admitting that they were themselves somewhat taken aback when they discovered that these issues were so flagrant and so serious. So again, all of you, I would hope you would take that back and
Yes,
do
sir.
it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kindness.
Certainly, Senator Reid. I'm going to defer my questions till the end and give Senator Rounds an opportunity to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just begin by just saying, look, I appreciate the service that you have all provided to our country. But I also want to point out something here, and that I think we have an obligation to call you on the carpet when it doesn't appear that you're getting your job done. Mr. McMahon, I just want to understand, you pointed out that you have an 85% positive rating, and I just want to allow you just a few minutes of my time to clarify. That means 15% of all the folks that are out there are telling you that they weren't satisfied. What's an acceptable number, and what did you do when you found out that you had 15% of these young men and women that were in these housing locations, that they had a problem, enough to where they would report up the line? Can you clarify for us that that was not necessarily something that you were bragging about?
Yes, sir, I would. And Senator, to your question, the acceptable number is 100%. And although we may fail at times of being able to support the resident, the question then becomes how responsive and how do we respond to the failures that we have. The clear answer today, as you've heard and as we have seen, is that we've not responded collectively well enough as we have.
So we've got a lot of work to do, and you would say that in terms of your role and responsibility on this, we've got a commitment that this is one that you're going to be working your way from the top down to find a better way to do it.
Sir, let me be clear. I am the accountable person in the Department of Defense for ensuring that we provide quality residents or quality homes to our residents that elect to live on base, and ultimately it is my responsibility working with my partners here and our privatization partners. So yes, I'm committed to that.
Thank you, sir. And I suspect that this subcommittee may very well be visiting with you again in the future on it. Let me just, Colonel Henderson, as I know you, but Secretary Henderson, you have over a period of years proven to me that you are a person that is very capable of coming up with solutions and working with people. I just want to know, I have a two-part question for you, and I've got about 1 minute and 53 seconds left. First, could you please discuss with the members of this committee what recourse the Air Force currently has at its disposal to hold accountable underperforming privatized housing owners that are on your bases? And secondly, what tools or mechanisms could this committee help provide you with to better hold them accountable in the future?
Thank you, Senator. First, we have a myriad of tools that I won't talk about now where we measure performance, and there's a number of those. But when we see those performance indicators start to lag, which we have with a few of our companies, we have these options inside the transactional documents to retain incentive pays. How much incentive pay we have the discretion kind of varies from partnership to partnership, but we have that option, and we do, and our Air Force team would tell you in a lot of cases we've never paid the full incentive pay, but we always end up having to pay partial. When things get really bad, as they have at Tinker Air Force Base, we've had to stop. We've had to get with the project owner and put them on a very deliberate corrective action plan, which is part of the transactional documents. And that's what we can do inside of the programs. We do have the ability to go out with state and local authorities for violations for the EPA, for building codes, and for landlord-tenant laws. For some reason or another, it sounds like some of our bases that's mixed up, but we do have those authorities also. Additionally, we've also, in places where we found suspected fraud or malfeasance, we have initiated Office of Special Investigations, and we're working with the FBI on some of those currently.
I'm going to ask if you could respond for the record with the remaining portions of answers to my question, but I want to know one more thing. If we could put together a Bill of Rights, a tenant's Bill of Rights, do you believe that the Air Force, and I know you can't speak for all the others, but do you believe the Air Force could participate and work through the issue of creating a Bill of Rights that the private contractors we use, do you think we could do a good job of putting something like that together?
Absolutely, sir. And inside the Bill of Rights, we talked about this thing of accountability earlier. There's some important things in there. For instance, if the resident should have the choice of whether they pay their rent or not if they feel like their landlord isn't giving them a healthy and safe place to live. And that makes the landlord responsive financially to the resident. Additionally, I think there should be rebates for untimely repairs, for power outages, and those things that they have to do for self-help. Some of our project owners already do things like that. I would like to see that franchised a bit, because that's where we're receiving our positive satisfaction ratings. And then finally, it would be nice if we could look at something where we had a little bit more discretion over the entire incentive fee. So when we weren't getting the response out of our project owners that we expected, that we had a little bit bigger hammer inside the partnerships to influence that behavior.
Thank you. Thank you all once again for your service. Appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to move forward.
Senator Kane.
Thanks to all of you. You've heard the same testimony that I've heard, and Senator McMahon, you used three very good words in your opening comment: communication, engagement, responsiveness. Those are things that are needed. Clearly, the frustration of family members not feeling like they have a place to go, they're getting turned away here, turned away there, they don't have an avenue where they can approach to get an answer is really, really important. So those are good words, but I want to say, Secretary Barry, you used great words. You used accountability and apology. Accountability, Secretary McMahon, you said you are the accountable person, but I think what we're going to want to see as we work on the NDAA over the course of the next couple of months, where is the accountability for poor performers? Where is the mechanism that's a fair mechanism in connection with contracts that exist already and can't just be torn up? But what can we put in that creates accountability for poor performers? Is it a withholding? Is it access to bases by local building officials with the ability to sanction poor performers? There's got to be accountability. The communication mechanism is really, really important because it's so frustrating to not get an answer, but there have to be accountability mechanisms. And then I'll say, Secretary Barry, you used the apology word, and I highly, highly commend you for that, because these folks are owed an apology, and frankly, they're owed an apology more by Panel 3 than by Panel 2. We got to hold Panel 2 accountable for living up to their contract, but these folks did not volunteer to be a Lend-Lease tenant or a Lincoln tenant. They volunteered to be a member of the military. They volunteered with their spouses to be soldiers and military families, troops and military families. So to the extent that there's an apology owed, it's more from y'all. It's more from the command structure that has let them down by not having the accountability mechanisms they can live. I asked the panel of the business folks just that simple question: have any of you ever served? Have any of you ever lived in military housing? For the obvious reason. There's no shame in not serving. I didn't serve in the military. But if you haven't lived the life that these people live, you guys understand the life, but they don't necessarily understand the life. These military spouses, first, they are in a joint project to patriotically serve this country. Second, they deploy and move around and change locations repeatedly in ways that are extremely stressful. Third, they're dealing with the military deployments of their spouses and family members in the longest war in the history of this country, multiple deployments again and again and again, and worried about the physical safety of their loved ones. So you put all of that, and then on top, military spouses have an unemployment rate that's 3 to 5 times the national average, because it's very difficult to find jobs as a military spouse, either because of the absence of high-quality child care or an employer that looks at you and thinks, well, boy, you're really qualified, but you're going to move in the next year and a half, so I'm not going to hire you. So there is a particular set of challenges that these families deal with that you understand. I'm not sure that the private housing providers, even after all these years, fully understand that. This is, for most of them, it's a division of a big housing enterprise where they're dealing with all kinds of tenants who are not military spouses, not military families, to deal with these issues. So this is incumbent upon you to get right in the accountability mechanisms that you set up. And to the extent that we've fallen short, hey, there may be things that we need to apologize for. To the extent that problems are the most persistent in a legacy housing, you know, if we didn't build it right or maintain it along the way and then it's causing problems, then that's something that we need to fix from a budgetary standpoint. But they are owed an apology, and I'm glad that you made one, Secretary Baird. Last thing I'd love to ask Secretary Beeler, I know about the GAO investigation that's undergoing. Tell me about the IG investigation you mentioned.
Yes, Senator. A couple things. First, when we were made aware of the situation at Fort Benning last, my office, I was not in the office, but last August, my office immediately launched an investigation by the Army Corps of Engineers. That report took 10% of all.
Can I just, because I'm way over time, just the IG investigation you mentioned.
Yes, the IG,
tell us about that.
The IG investigation is being called by the Chief of Staff of the Army to do spot, swoop down, splash type of inspections on designated installations that obviously we're not going to reveal in advance in order not to compromise the and when we have those results, I'd be happy to share them with the committee and engage in further discussion.
That would be enormously helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate some of the initial testimony, Secretary Beeler, with your statement from the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff and Secretary Bayer. I think it takes, it's not always easy to just apologize, but I think that's warranted here. Secretary McMahon, I appreciate your written testimony and on the moral obligation that we have, that the Pentagon has, as you mentioned, as a military member. I didn't like the statement in your testimony about, well, they're not required to live on base. It's kind of a non sequitur in my view, and I mean, the whole point of this hearing is that if they're going to live on base, it should be appropriate, outstanding housing. So I think you might want to relook at that one, because that's not the point, in my view, at least.
Senator, may I respond?
Yeah, you may.
Senator, the intent of that is to say what we want to do is create on-base housing where our residents, our military members and families want and desire to live. And that's a matter of motivating our private sector partners to build something so that it becomes the first choice. If I implied something other than that, I apologize.
Okay.
But that's our goal, is to make it so good that they want and desire to live there, and that's where they choose to.
No, I think that's a good goal. Maybe I read it differently, but I just kind of read it differently. Anyways, the point is, if we're providing housing on base, it should be outstanding, and it shouldn't be, well, you can always go off base. That's not, I don't think anyone believes that, and that's how I read yours, and maybe I'll take a look at it and reassess it. I want to go to this issue that the first panelist, Ms. Cornwall, raised, I think she called it an unholy alliance or a marriage that exists between the housing kind of entities and maybe even the senior chain of command and the private companies. And I think she was making a good point where it seemed like they seemed to be very closely aligned, almost opposed to the interest of the service members, which is the whole damn point of good housing. It's for the men and women in the military and their families. So can any of you address that? I think she's raising a good point. How do we address that? And let me just throw out another question, because again, I don't have a lot of time here, but the chain of command failures. It does seem like something happened, or something has happened, not in every case, but where the chain of command, the unholy marriage, as she mentioned, seems to create a situation where the people we are all dedicated and supposed to serve, including this housing situation, gets forgotten or thought about last. And I'd like you to comment on that. I know you are all here for her testimony, but it seems to me it was powerful.
Senator, if I could comment on your second question first, and that is this concept of leadership. Whether it is on the private partner side or whether it is on the military side, it's clear to, I think, all of us that there has been a breakdown in leadership. We have senior NCOs who ought to represent the needs of their soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. We have first sergeants. We have commanders at all levels whose job is to take care of the individual and take care of the family. We recruit the individual, we retain the family, and if we're not doing that on the military side, we're failing. If on the other side, that first line of defense is the manager on the local base, if they're not sensitive to those requirements, we failed there. And so this is a failure of leadership on both sides that we need to address and figure out how we change the way we've attacked this.
How about this unholy marriage or alliance that she was referencing?
Sir, as you know from your private sector time, it's about partnerships. I will tell you that it's absolutely essential that we're partners, that we understand what each brings to the table. These homes, as you know, are not government homes, they're private homes, and so we have to acknowledge that and the legal elements associated with that. At the same time, we have to partner with them in a way that provides, at the end of the day, the best quality home that we can to our residents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So ultimately, each of you are here representing the services, and you are responsible for making sure that these private partners are providing safe housing, responding to maintenance on time, generally satisfying the terms of their agreements. In practice, these private housing providers are virtually guaranteed to make a profit. They get a base fee plus cost. Your big tool is the incentive fee. Now, DOD told the committee that the incentive fees were paid out about 95% of the time. And you heard the testimony from the companies themselves. Not a single one said they were ever denied all of their incentive fees, at the same time that we're receiving testimony about appalling conditions. So I just want to understand what's gone wrong here, how it is that these guys can get